Skyrim, A Sorcerer's Tale by Rastislav. 511, Chapter 124, The Declaration. General point of view, an annoyed Thalmor Justicia glared at the quartet of Altmer before her, her arms crossed and her foot tapping the floor. Explain yourselves. Three of the well-appointed elves fidgeted in fear, while the one to their fore cleared his throat, unbothered by the death stare. We managed to retrieve critical information that I felt justified our immediate extraction. Yes, the woman drawled, the critical information that the Empire is preparing for war. That is correct. The ambassador managed to sound both condescending and agreeable at the same time. Their legions have been gathering from all the pacified provinces, which meant they will not waste time in declaring war. The Justicia began massaging the sides of her head. It is too early in the morning to deal with this, she muttered and waved for them to pass. Go inside, the High Justiciars will decide on what to do with you. You have our thanks, madam. The lead ambassador offered a short bow and walked past her without waiting for her annoyed response. The guards standing watch to the sides of the grand golden gates of Alinor's palace merely wrote something down as they passed them by, closing the way behind them as the justiciar outside began intimidating yet another delegation. By the gods, Gavril, one of the still shivering elves whispered. I felt like the madwoman was about to incinerate the lot of us. Peace, Arthur. The lead elf failed to keep his chest from puffing out. After standing in front of those two monsters in the imperial city, the uppity peasant could never scare me. The scared elf nodded rapidly. We are lucky you were with us. The three of us would have probably been strung up as an example. Fear not, friend, the leader smiled. So long as you follow my lead, no one will be able to touch you. Arthur smiled before awkwardly shuffling on his feet. Say, Gavril. The still smiling leader hummed. Do you know where the restrooms are? His new subordinate whispered, I don't want to shame myself later. Gavril's face twitched in disgust, but only for a moment. Go and deal with it. The three of us will cover for you. The other two looked miffed by the decision, but did not protest. Thank you. Arthur let out a relieved sigh and bowed, and promptly marched away. The instant he left his friend's sight, his entire posture shifted, going from submissive and all-around pathetic to firm and proud, his eyes sharp and his entire presence announcing that he belonged where he tread. He passed by two whispering Thalmor, the duo merely acknowledging that they saw him before returning to their plotting. Arthur saw a lone justiciar rounding the corner and immediately sidestepped next to a nearby pillar. The Altmer mage did not even manage a yelp as he was dragged to the side, a quiet crack following soon after, joined by a thump but a moment later. Arthur shut the window to the garden maze closed and finished buckling his new robes, the gaudy and imposing attire perfect for his intentions as he pulled the hood over his face and once more began stalking the halls of Alinor's palace. 10 more minutes of snooping soon revealed what he wanted to know as he listened in to a conversation of two Thalmor lovers. The duo spoke in hushed tones as the woman asked, Why did they let you out so soon? Another recess. The man scoffed just as quietly. They are lambasting Lord Finarfin about his failings in Skyrim, but everyone knows it will not go anywhere. Like they could have touched a demigod and a group of ancient archmagi if they were in his place. There, there. The woman giggled as she patted his head. We all know he will win in the end. Yeah, he sighed. I just find all this politicking to be a waste of time. We should be bringing the fight to the imperial tyrants and not battling each other for every scrap of influence. Hush. She placed a finger over his lips. You know I love it when you get passionate, but this is neither the time or the place. The man went to respond before visibly holding himself back and sighing. You are probably right. I need to return to Lady Iselin and help her with the Pyandanian treaty in a few minutes anyway. He smiled wistfully. Merely being a part of such work is an honor. Go and win glory, my love. The woman booped his nose. We will meet in the evening. The two shared another minute of diabetic-level sweet talk before the man finally managed to disentangle himself and marched off, followed closely by a figure he could not see. Iselin, eh? The male lover marched over to a tower at the palace's western edge, the two armored warriors guarding the way, letting him through after a quick salute. As they closed the door behind him, they both blinked, giving each other a quick look and casting some detection magic, only for the results to come back blank. Must have been the wind. The one to the left muttered, "The wind." His colleague scoffed, "Or we really shouldn't have spent all our pay at Alandra's." They stared at each other for a moment before firmly nodding, "Worth it." Arthur felt amused as he secured the bottle of invisible poison to his belt, happy that his suicidal maneuver was not discovered. He marched up the tower's stairwell like he owned the place and soon found himself looking over a small meeting consisting of 4 Altmer and an odd blue elf. "So that is a Merma." He quirked an eyebrow, but only for a moment, the mission's importance reasserting itself as he began closing in on the group. "Reread it all again, Ambassador." The High Justiciar Iselin tapped a large document unfurled between them, written in both Tamrielic and Pyandanian. "We cannot afford misunderstandings and confusion at this juncture." "Agreed." The blue elf spoke in an odd but legible accent. "We have but an hour to present a united front, or both our tasks will become more difficult." "Quite." The old Altmer lady nodded. "Does King Noravalian plan to attend the War Council once we have succeeded?" "He is currently content to remain in Shimmerine with his sworn friend." The Maorma answered simply, "As soon as you have dealt with your internal issues, we will move on as agreed." Satisfied with all the information he had, Arthur decided to act, his hands flashing out with 4 throwing daggers each and hitting the unsuspecting elves before they could so much as blink. Well, most of them at least, as the High Justicia instinctively activated her wards and blocked the poisoned projectiles an inch before they could pierce her throat. Sadly for the veteran Thalmor, that was all the distraction Arthur needed as he used the moment to leap over the table and the still dying elves, and leveraged all of his body weight to slam a jagged dagger straight through the potent ward, stabbing the Altmer through the side of her head and killing her instantly. The Altmer man he followed inside groaned in pain as he rolled over on the floor, doing his best to stand up. Poor fool should have played dead, Arthur mused as he stabbed him to death, not that it would have saved him. Thus satisfied, he began rummaging through all the documents he could see, rapidly copying everything from troop positions, plan proposals, and economic policy, down on the orb hidden within one of his belt bags. He then, with just a tad too much glee in his heart, incinerated the Pyandanian treaty. That should buy a few weeks. He nodded to himself and with no further hesitation opened a nearby window and stepped out of the tower, immediately following the information he gathered so far to the next High Justiciar on his list. Their protections were good, extremely good even, but sadly for them they did not expect someone of his caliber to simply ignore them through the power of his patron. The sanctum of the Thalmor movement, too relaxed and assured of its safety to even dare imagine something like him happening to them. And so Arthur got to work, breaking into towers, slaying guards and officials as he went, before ultimately ending his true targets. Before the hour was out, 4 High Justiciars lay dead, alongside their most trusted retinues, and the elf that was Arthur found himself wealthy with information. But all good things must come to an end. And so as he messily disemboweled a particularly powerful mage that managed to resist his personalized shadow-scale mana burn poison, he realized he had already wasted far too much time. He would still need to make an attempt at the secondary target. Arthur rapidly transferred all the information he gathered through his orb and promptly crushed it to pieces, the magic within ensuring the trace would never be followed. Nodding in satisfaction, he once more stepped out of a nearby window and shed all pretense of subtlety as he began to move, leaping and rolling across the palace's battlements and killing anyone who had the chance to notice him. A few extra murders later, he found himself within a passage that perfectly overlooked the great council chamber, within which a number of irritable Altmer stood waiting, the secondary target himself visibly holding himself back from outright seething, as his previously inevitable coronation seemed to grow increasingly difficult by the minute. Arthur began humming a song from his childhood as he retrieved a box from his belt, opening it to reveal a complex gathering of masterfully carved wooden parts and metal springs. A small commotion began spreading beneath him as he finished attaching the bow to the frame of his crossbow, the immensely powerful enchanted bolt sliding perfectly into the groove as he finished his tune. The Ultima woman he recognized as the lover of the boy he killed rushed into the chamber, screaming her heart out, "Alarm! Assassin in the palace!" Just as all eyes instinctively followed the source of the noise, Arthur lightly squeezed the trigger mechanism of his weapon, the bolt whizzing through the air with nary a sound. Unfortunately, Finarfin was expecting something like this. The High Justiciar empowering his body with ebon flesh and kicking the massive gold-embossed table below him in the projectile's path, detonating the bolt in a conflagration of crimson lightning before containing all of it within a powerful ward of his own making. Secondary target failed. Arthur noted detachedly, tertiary objective, escape. He activated the crossbow's secondary enchantment, making it disintegrate as he stood up and rushed to the side, just in time to avoid an explosion of force that would have pulverized him, body and soul. 5 heavily armored justiciars clutched at their throats as he passed them by, the poison now in their blood causing their magicka to catastrophically detonate and take the following 2 squads behind them. He weaved past yet more Ultima civilians, killing all of them because they might be useful to the enemy as he kept evading and murdering patrols whenever he could. But he knew in his heart that escape was never going to happen, not even with the favor of his lord and lady coursing through his veins. He stabbed the throat of a brave young mage, and just as he lay the body down, he felt his instincts screaming at him, causing him to leap away, but too late as his legs were torn off his body and he was slammed into a nearby wall with enough force to break his reinforced spine. He looked up to see the secondary target prowling over to him with pure hatred in his eyes, the malignant mace of the previous overlord brimming with power within his grip, as 2 powerful Dremora warriors flanked him on both sides. The High Justiciar went to say something, probably some kind of threat or promise of torment, as his ilk were often wont to do. A perfect chance for what his lord would no doubt declare, one final fuck you. Finarfin barely managed to evade the cursed needle. The assassin spat at him with no warning whatsoever, the silverine weapon cutting across the side of his face and rotting the skin off fully before he managed to dispel it. Knowing his act of spite would be naught but an inconvenience, Jackal still allowed himself a satisfied smirk as he activated his lord's blessing and spitefully turned himself to ash. Raven's face twitched as he frowned at something no one else could see. Jarl Balgruff, the Greater of Whiterun, giving him a curious look as he asked, "What happened?" "Nothing." Raven shook his head, voice clipped. "The time has come." The other officers within the command tent all stood up straighter, anticipation clear in their eyes as the Hortator lay his orb atop the map of Valenwood they were studying but a few minutes prior. Just as he did so, a floating image of the Emperor in full armor flickered into existence above it. All around Cyrodiil and beyond, such a scene repeated itself. High King Torrig stood atop a balcony in Castle Dower, Skyrim's 3rd Legion, diligently training below him as his court mage brought up the wondrous communication device before him. King Uthred of Evermore smiled as the King of Wayrest finally bowed to his authority before his cousin brought his attention to the artifact. The great lords of Morrowind all sat within Mournhold's palace, the Falmer mage in front of them holding the item of their attention. Minthara Septim sat atop Odaviing, the air around her parting as if merely attempting to impede her flight would be a serious crime. She felt a flicker of magic and listened to her adoptive parents' words. There once was a dream, dreamt by a man. Titus Mede II spoke, his voice a mix of sorrow and determination. In his dream, he saw all of Tamriel united as one, all of its peoples living in harmony and contentment with each other and thriving as they never have before. And he succeeded in this dream. Titus looked up at all of them. For centuries, Tamriel grew and prospered, threats were removed before they could appear, and peace was held through law and order. His face grew grim. Sadly, Talos's dream died with his family, as all dynasties inevitably do, to dissent, corruption, and the meddling of Daedra. A dark smile overtook his expression, or so many would wish to believe. She felt now as if he was looking directly at her, but the dream is not over. He declared firmly, it is not over until one of us, who still holds it within their heart, dares to dream of it. The Thalmor and their third dominion would have seen it die 30 years past. They would return us to the time of slavery and suffering just to satisfy their petty egos and delusions of grandeur. Titus grasped the hilt of his sword. They were shown once that no amount of treachery will see the dream snuffed out. Their ambitions brought low through the sacrifice of countless heroes and dreamers. In a fluid motion, he held Goldbrand up, the legendary blade blazing in golden glory. They thought us cowed and destroyed. They thought us weak and frail, the fools. The Septim blood flows still in the heart of our empire, and new heroes have risen to see the dream come true. Let this be the final war of this era. Let Tamriel stand united once again, and let peace and order return to these ravaged lands once and for all. The glow of the blade began suffusing the Emperor, and his presence grew even through the projection. And to all those who would stand in the way of our dream, he boomed, "Kill them all and let the gods sort them out." 512, Chapter 1, 125, The Dragon Pounces. Sir, a clipped salute drew the general from watching the fresh auxiliaries be beaten into the ground by his legionaries for the 5th time today. We caught another group of smugglers. The tired high elf contemplated simply ignoring the irritating overachiever, but thought better of it and turned to face her. And what could they have possibly been smuggling that I would need to hear of it? Grinning like a cat that just caught a mouse, the girl puffed her chest out. "Entire crates of moon sugar, sir." Out of the corner of the tent came a purr that almost sounded like a snicker. The general, being thoroughly done with dealing with new recruits, Power walked over to her, nearly making her stumble as he grabbed her by the shoulders and began lightly shaking her. "And who exactly was smuggling moon sugar, soldier?" She had the audacity to look confused as she blinked. "A group of Khajiit, sir." "A group of Khajiit," he repeated tiredly, his grip on her shoulders tightening. "And they wouldn't happen to have been dressed as merchants and were transporting their contraband in the open, now would they?" The fool shuffled, and the general almost began to hope, only to have his hopes dashed utterly as she perked up once more and declared to the entire God's damned camp, "They must have been fomenting rebellion, sir. Why else would they be acting in the open?" The girl had actual stars in her eyes as she looked up at him. Fermenting. The general's voice shook slightly, gaze falling to the ground in despair before snapping back up, eyes aglow with a swirl of magic as he began shaking her like a twig. "The only thing they were fermenting, you damned fool, is their skooma, a substance legally owned and traded in both the kingdoms of Anaquina and Palatine." Once more the girl shook his world by daring to look confused. But nothing," he snarled. "What you have done is not capture smugglers or insurrectionists, but detained a group of legitimate God's damned merchants." He paused, a sudden thought occurring. "You didn't trash their cargo, did you?" Finally, the fool seemed to start to realize just how much she had fucked up. She gulped, "Maybe. Dash." The guards standing to the sides of General Tollendir's tent did not react as they heard their commander roaring at the overeager idiot. The flaps of the tent splitting apart as the junior Thalmor was thrown out with enough force to skid across the dirt. "I do not need you fools creating another bloody rebellion when we have 4 entire legions standing in spitting distance." The girl shuffled back onto her feet and went to salute, but was instead forced to duck as a shard of ice nearly took her head off. "Get out of my sight and deal with this mess," came the threatening roar, and without making it worse for once. And what must have been for the first time in her life, the girl chose wisdom. Back within the tent, the general sighed as he sat atop his war table. "God save me from foolish children," he muttered. "Since when did they send youths of merely 25 to war? The complete idiots." Once more, the snicker-like purr came from the edge of the tent. "Jarazir thinks your Thalmor should focus more on educating their tools instead of indoctrinating them." "They are your Thalmor as well," Tollendir corrected offhandedly, a growing habit by this point. Yes. Jarazir is ever a loyal servant to the Moonkeepers," he said with the utmost extent of his sincerity, of which there was none. "You wish me to settle ruffled feathers, yes?" "If you could, that would be lovely." The tired officer grunts. "Khajiit is happy to help." The Catman smirked, their long-standing back and forth tilting into his favor. He leaned against a wooden pillar and hummed, "Khajiit merely wonders, why focus your worry on the legions if the Alkush child is the true threat?" "You really know how to cheer an elf up, Cat," Tollandir immediately scoffed, "because I wouldn't be able to do anything to her if I tried. We have a number of Archmagi in the camp, and an elder is on their way to join us as support." He closed his eyes and sighed. "Hopefully it will be enough." "And if it is not?" Jarazir asked. "Then we die." The general shrugs. "You'd think that would be obvious." "Khajiit thinks you could use some sugar in your life." The large armored catman snickers before suddenly stilling so completely one could not be blamed if they thought he died. Immediately tensing, Tollandir grabbed the hilt of his sword and stood up. "What is it?" Khajiit does not know. Jarazir's hairs were all standing on end. But something is very wrong. Having learned to trust his friend's instincts, the Ultima General walked up to him and promptly pulled his ear, causing the poor catman to hiss in pain. "Pull yourself together. We may be under attack." Jarazir hissed at him, but did as was told, rushing outside just after the High Elf and moving over to his own tent. "Jokosa, come," he commanded. An annoyed yowl greeted him, but only a few seconds later, what the other races would have no doubt confused with a very large golden-furred house cat, dressed in perfectly fitted robes and wearing a charming wizard's hat, stepped outside, immediately leaping atop Jarazir's shoulder as she did. "What is it?" she demanded irritably. "Something is coming," was all Jarazir said as he walked over to where Tollandir had gathered his officers and some magi. Just in time as well, as a distant roar drew all of their attention, the Khajiiti present shivering in instinctual fear as they looked up in horror. And then they saw it, know them as 8 massive creatures that could only ever be dragons, cut through the cloud cover and began hurtling down at the Dominion war camp. Now, if only things had merely ended there. Before Tollandir could even begin giving out orders, it felt as if the world itself had sucked in a breath in anticipation. Moments before, a garble of thundering words too loud to understand cracked through the air, and a storm of death descended upon them. Waves of fire, ice, lightning, and even corrosive acid, in the case of one particularly nasty fucker, smashed into the Alinori camp, killing hundreds and potentially thousands in mere seconds. The panic that followed only served to grow that number as some of the newer soldiers simply stampeded their comrades in an attempt to get away, a few of the truly unfortunate ones getting suffocated by their own tents as they were repeatedly stopped from getting up. Again and again, the dragons abused the lack of concentrated opposition, butchering hundreds more as they shouted them apart, or simply devoured them, once their confidence grew too great to simply let themselves fly by and pick the elves and catmen off. And that arrogance would cost them, as Tollandir finally managed to establish some form of order, and the trio of grounded dragons currently feasting on his soldiers were bombarded with arrows and magic, and even artillery, as one particularly gutsy ballista crew managed to point blank a purple-scaled dragon in the eye. The Archmagi and Alfik Khajiit present quickly managed to organize themselves as well, and prevented the 2 remaining dragons from ascending with their bloodied wings, as one had a tower suddenly grow from the ground next to him and fall onto his head, and the other was flash frozen by a particularly irritated house cat. The suddenness of the situation slowing the orange dragon long enough for another archmage to fry his brain with a concentrated burst of chain lightning. The Thalmor cheered as the dragons were slain, even if each second they took to cut them down made them suffer casualties from their still undefeated enemy. 3 of the still flying dragons grew enraged at the demise of their brothers and began chasing after the mortal mages, crushing everything in their path up to and including spiked wooden barricades as they did their utmost to rip the elves and cats to pieces. An archmage duo managed to take one down at the cost of one of their own, the younger elf acting as bait, his powerful alteration useless to stop the dragon's teeth from bisecting him as the older one used the moment to shove a massive jagged pillar of ice through the beast's throat. Another chased after an Alfik and her Khajiit bodyguard, being blasted with lightning all the way, and thus too enraged to notice the towering form of Jarazir atop his armored Senche mount, the leader of the auxilia ramming his enchanted halberd directly into the dragon's wing joint before using it as a springboard to leap atop the beast's back. The dragon immediately began thrashing, roaring a fire breath directly below himself and singeing Jarazir's fur terribly, but not enough to dislodge the catman, as he used this alchemically treated claws to rip through the back of the dragon's head, killing him, and not quickly. The final member of the enraged trio found himself surrounded by Tolindir's retinue, the many elite Altma soldiers, spell swords all, having little to no trouble holding him back as they used their centuries of experience to effectively herd him into the line of fire of their most powerful archmage, the deceptively young elven woman impaling the dragon numerous times with spikes of molten metal. That then proceeded to invade the beast and burn it from the inside out. Tolindir ignored his troops' cheers as he looked up to find two of the remaining dragons, one stormy blue and the other red, and both silently circling above the burning camp. A moment passed in silence, and then for the first time since the battle started, a female voice joined that of the dragons, this time clear and crisp as can be, Yol Tor Shul. Tolindir and Jarazir could only stare numbly as a wave of fire more befitting the sun instead of the earth descended upon the very center of their camp, instantly incinerating the armory alongside the vast majority of the artillery. A deep, dark chuckle echoed across the battlefield as the red dragon spoke to his rider. As one, the Thalmor Archmagi and their Alphic allies cast their spells on the relatively slow-moving targets, only to be forced to blink in surprise as they simply disappeared. And then, a full minute later, and just as they were all about to let out sighs of relief, their food supply exploded. Tolindir was barely held back from blatantly showing his terror as Jarazir stopped him from slumping onto the dirt, Jokosa patting his head and sending a burst of restoration through his body strong enough to jolt him back into action. Immediately, the general began barking orders and demanding that someone bring him a damage report. He thoroughly regretted that last decision, as he soon learned that nearly 4,000 Altma and almost twice as many Khajiit had lost their lives. And that was without even mentioning the injured, and those too broken to keep fighting. "Sir," the far too chipper Thalmor ran up to him. "What?" He rounded on her, eyes bloodshot. She nearly fell over before saluting. "Sir, the reports from the quartermasters just came in, sir." "Give me that." He ripped the parchment from her hands and began reading it. Mentally blanking at what he saw and doing it one more time, he felt his hands begin to tremble as he silently returned the report to the Thalmor. "Did I do good, sir?" she asked, her own expression looking thoroughly forced. Ah, he realized she was pretending that nothing had happened. "Yes, agent." He allowed tiredly, "You did good." 4 days after her surprise attack, having marched straight from Fort Black Boot west of Bravil, Minthara was once more greeted by the sight of Riverhold, her path forward cut off by the River Strid, the sabotaged bridge across it, and the fortified military camp at its banks. A still smoking military camp, she noted. They raised walls. General Julius didn't quite sneer, but it was a close thing, as if that is going to stop us. It very well could have if we were not so well equipped. Minthara nodded, and if their morale was not utterly drained by Vulstranfine's constant raids, that dragon was far too eager to hunt and stalk his enemies day and night. The lack of sleep would destroy any foe. Emir Casimir nodded, the Red Guard wearing far more elaborate armor than when he first met her in the White Gold Tower, but crossing the river will still impede us. "Ha!" Skirnir Stormcloak barked out a laugh, as if a mere river could stop the power of the voice. "Here, here." Julius grinned. "A shame my engineers will not get to experience building battle bridges, but I suppose it will save us the losses." The nearby quester in charge of said engineers blanched in fear. "So that is our plan?" The general's son, one Tiberius Gracchus, spoke up from his seat in the tent's corner. "Just flatten the river and the wall behind it and simply walk over the tired enemy?" "In essence," his father nodded. The young Imperial shrugged. "Hey, so long as it is less work for me." The nearby officers all gave him looks of well-concealed disgust, though no one was stupid enough to outwardly challenge a veteran battle mage of the Legion. Not quite. Minthara finally spoke up and began walking out of the tent. First, a small addendum. She did not tell them to follow her, but they did so anyway, just as she expected. "General, how ready are the other 2 legions?" "The third is half a day behind us, and the fourth a full day." Julius answered easily enough. "Commodus will be just in time to reinforce if the battle stretches out long enough, which it most definitely will." "Not confident in the second, General," Skirnir teased in the usual Nordic fashion. "Pish posh." The Imperial scoffed. "My second would crush any other army, of that much I can assure you, but the numbers on both sides are simply too great for the battle to end in a mere day." "And what if we were to break their morale?" Minthara asks. "Well, that would certainly allow us to take the city with ease." The general answered with only slight hesitance. "The issue is keeping that number of trained combatants broken for long enough, especially with their mages present. So if I were to hypothetically manage some kind of morale shock, we should content ourselves with a crossing." She quirked an eyebrow. "Indeed, Your Highness." Julius saluted. The theoretical gains would not be worth the attrition with so many unknowns on the enemy end. She cupped her chin and tapped her foot for a moment. "Very well. Is the second ready to march?" "As soon as you give the order, my lady." He smiled cheerfully. She shared a quick look with Skirnir, who immediately rushed to get the dragon banner ready. And her 2 bodyguards both tensed and checked their weapons. "Delphine, Esbern," she called out. The 2 blades, thus far relegated to mere observers, perked up. "Your command?" Esbern asked. "Infiltrate the city in the chaos, clear out targets of opportunity, and create openings where you can." She ordered simply. "By your will." Both of them saluted. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw her heavily armored honor guards carrying her personal banner with them, and nodded to herself. "Wait here," she told her followers. She took a few steps forward, Konarek covering her face without impeding her view, as she felt for the presences of her fallen brethren. She saw the enemy in the distance tense up atop their walls as they recognized her, an alarm rapidly spreading through the camp as they immediately began loading artillery to try and remove her from the board with a lucky shot. "Not that they ever could," she mused. Minthara took a deep breath, focused on where she felt their presence, and commanded, "Slentiidvo." For a moment, absolutely nothing happened, an almost awkward silence descending upon the future battlefield before, at the very edge of her senses, she felt the telltale sign of teleportation magic. And then 6 previously dead dragons burst out from the middle of the enemy camp, slaughtering and destroying everything they could get their hands on. General Julius, to his credit, gaped for only a moment as he unsheathed his blade and called, "Forward, for the Legion, for the Empire." 513, Chapter 126, Fall of Riverhold. General POV a bit earlier. General Tollendir's face was pained as he listened to the elder mages gushing about their most recent acquisitions, the seemingly youthful woman totally ignoring his obvious disinterest as she kept going on and on and on about how rare it was to get her hands on actual living spirits and how honored he should be to have been useful. How the bloody corpses were still considered to be living, he could never even begin to guess. "Lady Medliven," he spoke, "as much as I am humbled by your attention, I do have an army to run, and I do not doubt you would find much more fulfilling conversation with your fellow magi." The woman covered her mouth and spoke with the utmost disdain, as if those failures were worthy of my attention. Internally rolling his eyes, he nodded, "As you say." "Very well." The bored immortal played at grumbling. "Since my presence is so underappreciated, I will be going back to the spirits now. Do call for me if the humans try something." "You have our eternal thanks, my lady." His voice was utterly flat as she walked off. "God save me from those monsters." Even he was unsure if he was referring to the dragons or the magi. Shaking the useless thoughts away, he looked across the River Strid, the legionary encampment sitting just outside artillery range, already surrounded by sturdy magic-hewn walls. "Their battle mages are competent at least," he noted, being an alteration mage himself. The sound of armored boots drew him from his musings, and soon he saw his friend approach Jarazir. He nodded without fully turning. "What do you have for me?" The large catman made a noise with his throat. Tollendir learned, meant great displeasure, All hunters that volunteers were returned as before. He hissed, Khajiit found no trace of the dragon. The beast is playing with us. So we have come to learn, Tolindir said numbly before, seemingly out of nowhere, stating we are surrounded then. Khajiit would not put it that way. Jarazir tensed. No point in pretending. Tolindir shook his head. Any kind of supply run would need to be accompanied by a retinue capable of taking down a dragon before it can destroy the supplies, and that is not counting the other beast and its rider. The troops are already on edge. The Catman spoke what they both knew. If we implement rationing, morale will plummet. We cannot fight a war like this. And if we do not, Tolindir frowned, we will need to begin requisitioning from the city itself. The Khajiit of Riverhold would happily donate their food. Jarazir said, knowing that was more due to the fact the majority of the soldiers present were their brethren, and not high elves. And how long would that last us? Tolindir asked. No, we need to find a way to establish a supply route, or we will simply be bled dry, us and the city both. For a moment he wondered why his friend did not respond, and then his tired eyes rose to see a single figure stepping out of the legionary camp, gleaming armor of silver steel, crimson cloak, and a helm carved around a tusked mask on full display. Tolindir's nearby aide immediately grabbed a war horn and blew in it, the enchanted instrument alerting the entire war camp. The figure of the Empire's own demigod stopped walking, and Tolindir felt the telltale sign of the world itself holding its breath. He very nearly dove for the floor, but thought better of it, as his position in the back was not the one she faced. And then came the shout. As he had come to learn, the spells were aptly named Slentiidvo. This time his instincts did win over, and he leaned behind his war table, sharing a look with a shaking Jarazir, who did not even bother pretending he wasn't scared shitless. Only absolutely nothing happened. Tolindir slowly stood up and saw the confusion had also spread amongst his troops. He prepared to restore order, and then he felt his heart sink as he heard them, the familiar roars of 6 dragons, in the back of his damned base. In a blink, Lady Medliven appeared next to him, expression disturbingly eager. Deal with the Legion. I will entertain our rowdy pets. And then she disappeared just as quickly. Cursing the insanity of the elderly, the panicking general did as he was told, and the camp burst into action. Dash. Minthara did not stop as she saw her brethren rise from the dead at her words, the dragon banner falling in behind her as she simply kept marching to the destroyed bridge that separated them from the Thalmor camp. 3 legionary cohorts left the camp behind them, followed soon by the engineer cohort and the Riyadh Redguards. The lightly armored warriors, looking more eager for battle than some orcs she had had the displeasure of meeting. Enchanted bolts and rocks began flying from the elven base, some missing and some turned away by an invisible force as she reached the bridge, once more refusing to slow down as she simply commanded, Goldsteed Vo. Her intention and will met with the world's, and the world buckled, the ruined bridge reforming as if it had never been damaged and expanding sideways to the point it could let an entire cohort pass shoulder to shoulder. The elves atop the palisades panicked and started loosing arrows at her and her honor guard without their previous discipline. The well-crafted munitions simply bouncing off most of their armor if they even got that far. One unlucky fellow got an arrow stuck in his collarbone, but the burly Nord merely laughed the pain off. The elven arrows refused to approach her as she stood before the wooden wall and demanded fuss, causing the wood to cave inwards and shatter into pieces, followed swiftly by Tid Clo Ul. As her hammer appeared in her grasp, the world ceased moving as she rushed through the opening. The heavily armored troop of Khajiit, waiting behind the breach, stuck mid-flinch as they were showered in pieces of wood and iron. She grinned and got to work. The echo of the shout ended, and in the blink of an eye, the Khajiiti warriors disappeared in a burst of blood, the crown princess of the empire appearing just beyond their completely mauled formation and clutching at the throat of an elven archmage. The old elf choked, panic in his eyes, but only for a moment, as his neck was snapped and his head moved a full 90 degrees sideways. Credit where credit was due, the elf managed to activate a final spell as he was slain, bathing the area in fire, or at least attempting to. as a floating figure clad in recently remade robes materialized behind Minthara. Varlock clutched his hand, and the inferno that threatened his goddess shrunk into a tiny spot of immense heat. The dragon priest waving his staff to the side and deflecting an immense shard of ice with barely any effort. The elven archmage attempting to ambush him immediately summoned a group of Dremora and attempted to teleport away. But the instant Varlock detected his destination within the chaos of the battlefield, he too opened a passage and sent the tiny speck of light through it. Hundreds of meters away, a stone tower was disintegrated by a sudden blast of concentrated fire. Those few moments of destruction was all it took for the warriors of the Empire as the dragon banner surged through the breach in the wall, the elite force splitting into three as Skirnir led one flank to the western wall and Muntazir one to the eastern, the smallest group under Lydia jogging up to Minthara, who had just happily finished turning a group of Khajiiti riders into a smear on the ground with one word. In the distance, the legionary artillery began bombarding the elven positions, and the first cohort crossed the bridge, their enchanted banner deflecting a blast of thunder and letting them pass unmolested. Soon the entire southern end of the elven war camp fell into chaos. Elder Medleven smiled gleefully as she saw one of her new pets disembowel the other. The dragon's eyes glazed over as her illusions made him believe his brother was in actuality an arrogant elf who dared belittle him. The fool that passed for her apprentice finally brought down her own target as the dragon's bones turned jagged and sharp, cutting the beast to pieces from within. "A bit garish," Medleven commented, "but good execution." The centuries-old apprentice beamed and began chasing after the two remaining dragons, as they were still supposed to help the idiot mortals with their petty little war, and letting them burn a fifth of the camp was a bit much even in her own books. She felt the godchild crushing the mortals around her and smiled, making the dragon dig out its own heart as she finally grew bored of it before teleporting away. A Nord warrior immediately tried stabbing her as she materialized next to him, but his brother-in-arms suddenly thrust his sword through his neck with strength he did not possess previously. The entire detachment of warriors falling into violence as they forgot their own names and knew only bloodlust. She was just about to move on to the next group when suddenly one of the corpses jumped up, spear very nearly taking out her throat, or at least it would have if she was not beyond mere physicality. Her robes activated and the spear passed through her, the undead before her disintegrating with the slightest twitch of her fingers as she teleported away once again, just in time to avoid the curse of pain hurtling at her. Her assailant did not slow down, however, as the rather antique lich appeared next to her, hand glowing with what she immediately recognized as the advanced soul trap master necromancers used to rip souls out of still living bodies. "Sovngarde Saran," the creature growled triumphantly, even as it was blasted away by a burst of cursed sunlight, the edges of its robes burning in ghostly flames as they began turning its power against it. Medleven did not escape unscathed, however, as she felt an unyielding tether on her soul. The soul rend may have failed, but the soul trap still stuck with her. And to her surprise, she felt that if she were today during the entire day, her soul would be imprisoned. "Ha!" she croaked as the sensation made her shudder, "as if a corpse could kill me." The undead heard her and let out a grinding noise that may or may not have been a chuckle, Sahlon Falil. It drawled Zuu Nuzfin A**. Her growing annoyance practically exploded as the creature refused to speak in civilized, even if it had previously shown it could understand her. Feeling distinctly petty, Medleven met its eyes, the burning embers behind the mask flickering as her grand mastery of illusion magic struck its mind. She felt the spell connect and smiled gleefully as she expected the undead to simply unmake itself. Only, it merely stared at her. Her perception of time slowed as she examined what had just happened, tracing her spell's path into the creature, only to find that it had somehow been conceptually imprisoned. Swiftly realizing she was not dealing with a mere mage here, Medleven's entire posture shifted and she disappeared from her spot, the curse sneaking up on her, very nearly managing to touch her. Of course it is an overcharged rot touch. She scowled and summoned a scroll. the parchment enchanted by the greatest healer on Alinor, glowing brightly as she pointed the unmake undead spell at the dragon priest. Sadly for her, Varlok's words were not mockery, they were a warning. Teed, Clo Ul, Minthara's mask shimmered as she used the fully powered time-stop shout for the first time since battle was joined. The group of Thalmor justiciars hounding her, disappearing into fine red mist as she leapt off the ground and towards the elder mage, fighting Varlok. Medliven gasped as she felt the familiar tug on time, her training during the battle against the Numidium rapidly kicking in as she dragged herself aside within the timeline. The spell draining the vast majority of her magicka as she perceived the death of her self-proclaimed bodyguard detail, the god-child's leap, and the hammer passing through her flesh, all at the same time. The timeline spat her back to where she belonged, the force of it very nearly destabilizing the wards she kept up at all times. So wrung out was she that the only reason she remained in the air was the enchantment on her footwear. The godchild placed her hammer atop her shoulder and looked at the elder mage. Growing tired, old woman, she mocked. Medliven focused her mind, scanning the battlefield, the two dragons still rampaging through the camp, even as her apprentice chased after them, and the flagging morale of her own band of idiot mortals. Oh, the self-proclaimed archmages of her people were certainly doing damage. Entire cohorts were blown apart by them in the past few minutes, but the arrogant fools kept falling to simple fucking javelins because they were too stupid to protect themselves while showing off. The elder mage saw the godchild twitch, readying an attack, felt the tugging sensation at her soul, and promptly made her decision. Fuck that. Dash. Minthara's eye twitched rapidly as the mage disappeared from the battlefield, dropping hundreds of illusions of herself, as she did with the exact damn signature as her both in magic and soul. And to make things worse, the damned illusions were somehow killing her people. Fucking asshole. She growled and began the long process of chasing them down. Hopefully their master could at least see what she was about to do to them. Medliven reappeared within her tower in Alinor, her apprentice getting dragged with her and appearing next to her with a missing arm and eye. "Master," the woman questioned, "we are not wasting any more time on this farce," Medliven declared, voice definitely breaking. Her student tilted her head. "May I ask why?" "No," she snapped, "you may not." The apprentice bowed and walked off to heal herself, while Medliven merely remained in place, memories of another Nord who could make her feel this terrified flashing through her mind. And then a sudden thought occurred. By the time Talos reached Alinor, his voice was taken by an assassin's blade. Her fingers balled into a fist on their own. This septim has no such limitation. General Tolindir felt his eyes drooping as his bodyguard handed him a stamina potion, his sight clearing just in time to see a unit of heavy legionary infantry throw a salvo of javelins into the backs of his retreating troops, the dozen or so elven warriors falling to the ground, pained screams tearing out of their throats. "Call for a full retreat," he ordered tiredly, his heart utterly empty even as he saw an archmage bring down the final revived dragon. "The camp is lost, and they are cutting through our lines. We must hold the walls now." "What use are walls?" Jarazir hissed next to him, "if they can simply be told to part." Tolindir grunted in irritation at his friend, but did not answer. The silence between them failed to take hold as the clashing of steel, the screams of the dying, and the terrible roars of magic refused to die down, seeming to only grow worse as his orders were transferred and his troops began a semi-orderly retreat. Many died as the Imperial cohorts rushed after them, especially those facing the Red Guard Auxilia, the desert warriors nearly ignoring the Khajiit and chasing after Ultima specifically. And when they caught them, they took their time killing them. Tolindir steeled his heart and looked away as he saw a soldier of his be impaled, focusing instead on sending aid to those he could still save, even if it all felt rather useless as the dreadful red silhouette of the Septim's own Mount Bean circling the battlefield. The great beast descending and ruining his men with much greater skill than that of the dragons they had brought down previously, to the point that even Archmagi could not take it down, and more often than not paid for the attempt with their very lives. "Khajiit thinks," Jarazir began hesitantly, "that you should flee." Tolindir rounded on his friend with pure fury in his eyes. "What?" This army is the only fighting force that can face the Empire in elsewhere. Jarazir refused to face him as he looked over the battlefield. If Rimmon were to fall, and they got their hands on the main. He shook his head. Elsewhere would not stand with the Dominion for long. And what? You are going to stay here and die heroically? Tolindir snapped. Yes. Jarazir turned to face him. If need be, Khajiit will die to buy time. The Ultima general felt his guts churn as he actually considered his friend's words, the very idea of retreat making him feel sick in the soul. But in the end, he was a leader first, and both the war and the lives of his men came before his feelings, and he knew his friend was right. How many? He asked hoarsely. Khajiit will only need a few thousand. Jarazir responded simply, if only to make it believable. You will not delay them for long, Tolindir said uselessly. No. Jarazir nodded. Khajiit will not. Tolindir felt bile rising in his throat as he accepted the truth of things and spoke the accursed words. Jarazir stood below the southern gate of Riverhold, expression warm even as he saw the troops marching away in the thousands and leaving him and his behind. Follow the Walk of Kings. The supplies should last you all the way to Rimmon, and the oases will have enough water to get you through the desert. But what of your supplies? Tolindir asked. We took far too much from the city. Jarazir chuckled bitterly. The Empire wishes to conquer these lands, and they will want to buy goodwill with the people. Riverhold will not starve, and the Legion will be delayed while they wait for the supply train from Cyrodiil. The elf and cat shared a devious look, and both chuckled. Thank you, my friend. Tolindir offered his hand. We will meet again. Jarazir grinned. Do not doubt it. The scene repeated itself within Jarazir's mind as he felt the gates of the palace cave in under the weight of an enchanted hammer, the triumphant roar of dragons making his hairs stand on end, even as he attempted to look brave for his men. The masked figure of the child of Alkosh strolled into the palace of Riverhold with no fanfare, their eyes meeting as she tilted her head. You are the leader of this fortress. Jarazir is. He grinned at her, showing teeth as he clutched at his halberd. He heard he mutter something, and suddenly his weapon was not in his hand, and he was splayed out on the ground, his back aching something fierce as he looked up to see the demigod holding Jokosa by the scruff of her neck, the Alphic's magic flailing uselessly as a levitating figure pointed an unmoving finger at her. You are the official authority of the city, and the troops still standing within it. The crown princess of the Empire declared, You will command them to stand down, and the people to cease any kind of resistance, or I will react appropriately. Is that understood? Jokosa's defiant glare nearly made him defy the ultimatum, but then the legionaries outside began singing a song, a rather familiar song as well, one that was as offensive as it was unmistakable in meaning. The Song of Pelinal. The subtext of it all was clear to the Catman as he growled at his new captors. Very well. Excellent. She tossed his companion at him. Marco, you can tell them to stop now. She told the fucking Ultima next to her. Why was he not surprised? Jarazir slowly got up under the watchful eyes of the heavily armored Nord warriors that followed the demigod inside, holding his Alphic companion like his life depended on it, and with great hesitation in his heart gave the command, dash, dash, dash. Hours later, Minthara sat atop the throne of Riverhold, the secular chieftain of the city, forced to content himself with sitting to her side below her, as the legionary quartermasters of all three recently reunited legions all gave her the same answer to her question. She directed a scathing look towards the passage that led to the prisons, but held herself back from doing something foolish. She may direct Marco to sing a little tune to the cheeky bastard later. As always, Raven's unhinged ideas work wonders. She chuckled internally. The story of Pelinal and how he was the sole reason Bravil and Leowin were not Khajiit cities was a well-known one, but she underestimated just how terrified the cat people were of the Star-Made Knight. Then again, it is said they worship Akatosh, or Alkosh, because he appeared to Pelinal to tell him to stop killing them. Shaking the thoughts away, she faced her legionaries and nodded. So in short, we cannot advance through the desert, and the enemy will be given time to reinforce and fortify their capital. Yes, Your Highness. The quartermaster of the 2nd Legion bowed. She cupped her chin and considered matters. Her resurrected brothers were starting to feel the toll of her, dragging them back into life in 2 short intervals, and they would preferably need to take a few months off or be replaced with others to risk it again. Then a thought occurred. The River Strid. It connects Riverhold to Arenthia, yes. Indeed, Your Highness. General Julius stepped forward. A small tributary also passes through Skingrad, though it is mostly unnavigable. Still, it would be a useful supply line, she pointed out. The general grinned, without a doubt. Very well, Minthara decided. What moves are necessary to secure the line fully? The general did not answer immediately, sharing a few looks and mutters with his fellow officers before nodding and looking back up to her. The cities of Dune and Pa'alat would serve perfectly, Your Highness, though I do not foresee their garrisons presenting a grand challenge. Terrain? She asked. Pa'alat is placed to the north, where 2 forks of the Strad meet. He listed, it is a temperate place, surrounded by hill and forest. She nodded. The 3rd will deal with that. You may take Vulstranfine with you. General Commodus saluted. The city will be ours within the week. Good, is all she said. Dune, General Julius continued, is the entrance to the great desert of Western Elsewhere, likely to be much more well fortified, and is bordered by a great lake to its east, greatly limiting any approach. She considered it for but a moment. I will be taking the 4th. General Darius nodded. The Rihad Auxilia. Emir Casimir barely reacted and, Odaviing, to conquer the place. General Julius will remain to keep order in Riverhold and ensure supply lines. The general of the 2nd Legion felt like protesting, but he was no fool. The troops could use the rest. He accepted, I will ensure our supplies are in good order when the time comes to move on. The quartermaster chose to pipe in, the Windhelm Legion should be arriving in less than a week as well. Their delay will ensure our supply lines are untouchable. Excellent. Minthara clapped her hands and stood up. I will go and talk to my brothers now. You are all dismissed. Now then, she wondered as she strolled away, I wonder what Raven is doing. Dash. A few days of travel away, a grey-skinned elf whistled merrily, even as the forest around him withered and died, all the plants and many of the animals choking in accursed ash. 514, Chapter 1, 127, Gathering Kindling. Raven's point of view. Thousands upon thousands of boots shook the ground, their steps blending into a chaotic rhythm as the line of soldiers stretched so far behind me that even in the flatlands of Western Skingrad I could only ever see all of them with my 3rd eye. It was an oddly unique view I was graced with, being able to observe the front of the massive formation from atop my mount as they constructed a camp wall while the back still marched after them. The seemingly inevitable mess somehow ending up organized as the Redoran drill masters and their lesser imperial counterparts herded the troops around like true experts of the art. And speaking of my mount, the great orichalcum spider shuddered excitedly as I tossed a slice of meat into the air, the slab of food big enough to feed a family disappearing in an instant, as Nimhi made a mildly disturbing chirping noise and devoured it all. Getting used to that was very much worth it, as I got to relax atop the miniature howdah instead of having to use a saddle like the rest of the peasants. The bubbling excitement radiating off the massive spider was also oddly pleasing, even if the fact I could feel genuine religious devotion from an animal was another thing that would take a fair bit of getting used to. Scorch deadpanned even as he lounged atop a plush silk pillow to my right, and your enjoyment totally has nothing to do with scaring the shit out of the troops. No siree. You know, I'd even agree with you. I directed my look at the camp. If a bunch of them didn't immediately start treating her like some sacred sign of the gods' approval. Birdboy sat up at that, directing me with a withering look that held an almost physical force behind it. You are to Mephala what Nerevar was to Azura. The fuck were you expecting? Point. I snapped my fingers. Still fucking weird, though. He shrugged with his wings and promptly plopped down atop his new favorite bed. My master. Akulakan voiced, the meatbag general sent word, the pre-battle meeting is to begin within the hour. Oh? Umbra, who had been pretending to not be paying attention, are we finally going murder something? No. I deadpanned. The poor fuckers at the bridge are barely above a militia. I doubt we will be needed. You and your practicality. Her monotone practically spat the word. Why not simply enjoy the act of disembowelment for the joy of it? Because, my dear Miss Murder, I drawled, disemboweling someone for the pleasure of the experience is much more difficult when you yourself are in possession of bowels. Tends to ruin the whole thing with this little trait called empathy, though I am unsure if you even know what that means. Oh my, shaming the mass murderer. Her voice was still flat as she mirrored my own. How ironic. My eyes flashed with fire as my gaze snapped in her direction. Bitch, I will enchant your sword to heal wounds instead of making them if you keep talking shit. Her whole cold demeanor disappeared as she hugged the sword that held her soul. You wouldn't dare. Hermaeus Mora thought so too. I smirked at the automaton. And how did that turn out for him? I felt a flash of genuine concern from the soul. You make a good point. Killing militiamen seems like a waste of time. Prideful little shit. I scoffed internally, but outwardly smiled. Good. I am going to go bother Tullius now. Be good kids. I gave all three of them a cheery backwards wave and marched off. Minutes later, I found myself with my most senior officers, all of us looking down on the Isterus Bridge in the distance, the same grand stone crossing that served as the physical connection between Cyrodiil and Valenwood. Colour me surprised. I drawled, the fuckers didn't even try destroying it. They likely felt it would not be worth it with powerful mages involved on both sides. General Tullius, serving as overall commander and personally leading Legion Whiterun, clinically noted, sabotaging their own infrastructure would be a sign of panic, a minor annoyance for us, but a severe hamper to Bosmary morale. It could still be a trap of some sort. Almaril Farron, recently promoted and in command of Legion Kraganmore, added, doubt it though, the Emperor's declaration probably hasn't even reached them yet. Agreed, Tullius nodded without turning. The garrison doesn't look to be excited, and the doors remain unbarred. Dagoth, do you see anything? The complete lack of deference in his tone made some of the nearby Dunmer bristle, but thankfully not the actual commanders. They are completely unaware. I answered after a few seconds. Only around 100 of them as well, seems to be the usual border guard. Farron is probably right on the money. Only my eyesight allowed me to see the Redoran elf stand just a tiny bit taller. Good. Tullius nodded. Legate Hrongar and Captain Marin Balgruf's brother and the elder leader of the Sorn Mer stood at attention. You are to take a unit of housecarls and whitecloaks respectively, then storm the bridge and clear the way for the rest of us. Thankfully, I had already informed my subjects not to question the good general, so Marin followed Hrongar's salute, accepting the order as if it had come from my own mouth. The rest of us, Tullius went on, will finish the camp while you clear the way. Count Julian will remain in command of the Auxilia and will serve as our rear guard. The Count of Kvatch, the very same young man I blackmailed into preparing additional forces for the war months before I even left for Morrowind, saluted without a word. I will be the first to admit, in the privacy of my own mind of course, that I was surprised by how seriously the kid was taking this entire thing. His whole slouched noble air had been transformed into someone who obviously knew what he was doing, even if the amount of enchanted gear he was carrying made him look like he was going full pay to win in real life. Then again, that was how wars were won most of the time, wasn't it? Unaware of my musings, Tullius went on, Lord Farron will be in command of the vanguard, while the rest of us will remain with the corps. Our formation will be compact and focused, with no allowance for scattering. He turned away from the bridge to face me. I trust that you will know where to act and where not to. We've been through this ride before, General. I shrugged. You focus on defeating their soldiers, while I will focus on defeating their wills, same as before. Good. He nodded and immediately focused elsewhere. Our initial target is the border city of Arenthia. The city used to hold a large imperial minority that changed as you might expect. His gaze hardened. There still remain some humans who did not flee, and they are to be treated as enemy civilians until stated otherwise. He met the eyes of every one of his human subordinates, and while discomforted by the idea, no one felt like speaking up against him. The elves and one familiar orc gave naught a singular shit naturally. Arenthia is well fortified. Thus satisfied, Tullius continued, "The good news is that the forests around it are not thick enough to heavily impact our artillery train. The bad news is that they are sufficient to disrupt our battle formations." He steepled his fingers. "Our ultimate goal is Falinesti itself, and the whole of Valenwood, if we can manage it in one push." He did not sound terribly confident in the latter, which means that the forests are only going to get worse before we are done. "And what about all the talk of moving trees the troops are whispering about?" Varen asked with a raised hand. "Armor won't be of much use if the plants decide to crush us, or worse." Instead of answering, Tullius looked at me. "Shouldn't be an issue," I hummed after mentally sifting through all the information I gathered beforehand. "They can move when needed, but even if the Bosmer manage to rouse their support, they will almost exclusively remain a terrain issue." "Still noteworthy," Tullius said, "which means we will have to establish proper protocols amongst the troops. The enemy outnumbers us, and the terrain is completely in their favor. Our preparation must be made perfect to counter this." Sadly for me, I failed to slink away in time, and I was stuck listening to increasingly inane rules and regulations the troops will need to have drilled into their heads. Thank fuck I wasn't one of them. General point of view, Hrongar of Clan Olafsson of Whiterun grinned as the comparatively tiny wood elf before him deflected the swing of his greatsword, the nimble Mer dancing around his blows, even as his brethren fell all around him to bolt and blade with each passing second. The elf was fast with his attacks and very nearly slashed the large Nord's throat at 3 separate occasions, the obvious commoner's survival serving as a boost to the defender's morale and allowed a few housecarls to fall to lucky shots from Bosmery bows, the poisoned arrows swiftly ending the lives of even the most resilient northerners. The wood elves felt their hearts rise as they, for but a moment, began pushing back, their comrade standing tall, for them, against the unbreakable wall of steel that was Hrongar, and holding him in place, only for all of it to suddenly come crashing down as the brave elf's eyes widened and he tripped, on a rock that but a moment before did not exist. And just like that, burgeoning hope was replaced with terror, as the young Mer was bifurcated by way of Nord Claymore, and the Isterus Bridge fell into the hands of the Empire. Raven's point of view. Feeling delightfully devious, I lowered my hand and smirked. "Didn't think you'd need to intervene in this one," Nerevar noted as I took in the scene and made a sketch. There were barely 100 of them down there. Done drawing the heroic stand that should have been but never will, I shrugged. The uppity little shit was about to get exceptionally lucky, and I couldn't be having that. Was it some kind of fate attempting to interfere, the world trying to balance the things out between the two sides, or merely a fluke? The logical part of me immediately jumped to my enemy's more esoteric supporters, but confirmation would have to wait for later. A linchpin then. The first Hortata hummed through his helmet. That would have been annoying. And thus I cast rock. I nodded smugly. Can't ever go wrong with rock. "All hail," my predecessor drawled, "the weapon of all our ancestors indeed." The recently returned Anondor piped in, the words feeling just a slight bit forced, as he still had trouble with the mere act of existence. My experiment with Skirnir allowed me to fix some of his problems, but the rest would sadly all be on him. Unaware of my consideration, he pointed at the distance. "It appears the vanguard is about to start moving." "We probably ought to join them then," I pretended at grumbling. "Tullius may have given us full autonomy to act, but that doesn't mean we can laze around." "You do realize it is only you that needs convincing of that." Scorch chirped, "Lazy ass. You know that pillow you are enjoying so much?" "Yeah? I think I'm going to get one of my own. Great, made of phoenix feathers." Before most mortals could blink, Scorch had materialized next to me and promptly skedaddled. The march to Arenthia was oddly silent. Eerily so, in fact, as we marched across the stone road that did not look like it had been maintained in decades, and probably longer. The bridge across the River Crescent, a tributary of the Strid to its south, was somewhat better maintained, if only to stop it from crumbling in on itself. No garrison stood on that crossing, meaning they either did not find facing us to be worth it and withdrew, or were unaware of our presence to begin with. Not even the Thalmor would be that incompetent, though, I hope. With each step we took, I could feel a gaze surrounding us. It was not a mortal thing, but neither was it Daedric. In fact, it felt distantly similar to Kind's own caress, but much more primal, the magic in the air humming as it followed some kind of silent song I couldn't quite identify. My observation of the phenomenon continued as we marched, my focus only increasing as we went deeper into the Bosmeri domain, lest I be surprised by enemy trickery while parts of me were distracted. And yet, to my shock, no trickery did come. What I know to be the presence of Y'ffre was focused almost solely on me, watching, evaluating, and easily coming to the unavoidable conclusion. Divine attention was not something I truly expected when fighting the Thalmor of all factions. But Y'ffre was not your usual god. It, or rather he, was focused on one area instead of the entire world, and was in pact with one specific people over all others. A people thoroughly under Alinori leadership. The conclusion should thus not be even one slight bit surprising, as I felt the Bosmeri troops hiding to our south be empowered, only slightly of course, but even the singular percentile increase to accuracy and agility I felt them receive would probably end up rather problematic on a large scale. Tullius, being the absolute badass he was, didn't so much as twitch as I informed him of this. The veteran mad lad simply doubling our watch and scout contingents to resist ambushes and proceeding just as planned as we approached the stone-walled city, and immediately throwing himself at setting up a siege camp. The Thalmor general within the city probably had the right idea. Draw us in with a relatively easy target that was Arenthia, engage us in grinding combat, keep at it until both sides are tired and we are ready to commit, and then sweep us away with the Bosmer auxiliaries. The plan was textbook perfection, and with anyone else it may have even worked. Rolling my eyes at the obvious strategy, I turned away from the city and to the south, signaling for my most elite forces to ready themselves as I did, and began walking towards the forest brimming with wood elves. I stood just outside the edge of the forest, my metaphysical gaze meeting with that of Y'ffre and affecting the equivalent of a raised eyebrow at the forest god. The primal force of Valenwood did not even consider the implication and refused to relent. Very well then. I grinned and felt my divinity begin to simmer. If you want to play, then let us play. And then, without a moment's hesitation, I unleashed my curse onto Valenwood. Y'ffre is the Bosmer forest god, forests and song technically, the one they made a pact about not eating any plants with, and pretty much their chief deity. Officially it is Akatosh, but that is just lip service, carnivore cult all the way for these twinks. 515, Chapter 128. When the trees scream in Bosmeri. General POV, the eternally noisy forest surrounding a unit of Bosmeri hunters, turned eerily silent. The bravest and most daring of those who joined up with the Dominion army to fight back against the human invaders, all tensing as their instincts warned them of danger approaching. Their leader, an elder huntsmaster, took the risk and went scouting on his own under many protestations of his kinsmen, only to return minutes later with a grave expression on his face and tales of a large army marching towards Arenthia. Knowing it was coming was one thing, but to have it confirmed brought about an air of unease amongst the wood elven warriors. So everything is going as planned? A young elf asked, the pre-battle jitters hiding behind his excitement obvious to all. Our victory will be glorious. Calm yourself. The old elf directed him with a sharp glare. You may be a skilled hunter, but underestimating your quarry is the first step to a stupid death. Feeling the weight of the old teacher's stare, the young elf promptly shut up and gave him an apologetic look, something that made the older one merely scoff in annoyance. The silence between the wood elves turned heavy as they began habitually checking on the straps of their expertly crafted leather armors and the powerful sinews that served as the strings of their bows. Minutes later, that same young elf was leaning against a tree when suddenly he began to cough, drawing immediate attention from his comrades. "Pardon me," he muttered, ignoring how hoarse his voice now felt. The others gave him concerned looks, but returned to their work swiftly enough. Only the coughs did not stop at the young elf, and soon half of the company was feeling the need to clear their airways as the huntsmaster's face grew increasingly grave. He went to declare that they needed to pull back as his instincts screamed at him, but just then the piercing war horn of the city garrison rang out, commanding them to ready themselves for battle. Sadly for the old Mer, even if the order was not given, it was already far, far too late, as the younger Bosmer began coughing more roughly and found himself expelling a glob of simmering grey. His eyes widened in terror as he muttered, "Ash?" the act only serving to prompt even more hacking coughs. As if summoned by his words, the air around them shifted and became dry, and then in a blink, the great trees protecting their position from the enemy simply collapsed in on themselves, turning from vibrant green to terrible grey, as ash that should not exist suffocated them from within. Panic began spreading through the Bosmer lines like an unrelenting wave as their very homeland turned hostile to them. And there, upon the now open field, stood the culprit of it all. Tall and imposing, clad in ebony plate and void black robes accented with glowing purple runes, and with a dreadful crown hiding his face, save for the pair of blazing red infernos that were his eyes. Two towering warriors of a similar colouring stood to his sides, and another pair, one clad in heavy dwarven plate and another in gleaming moonstone of white and gold, guarded his back. And behind them all, a force stood that would bring any to their knees, as hundreds of Telvanni magi and Indoril knights stood as one and ready to charge. The huntsmaster felt his spirit drop, the blind enthusiasm still beating in the hearts of his subordinates, barely shielding them from the realization that he was struck with. One did not rise through the ranks like he did without learning to understand the situation he was in, and his understanding was as singular as it was certain. None of them were going to survive this. And so desperately, he rounded on his men and barked, "Fall back now!" Not waiting for their response, he grabbed his bow, enchantments paid for in glorious prey, glowing along its limbs, and took aim. Foolishly, the Mer whose lives he was entrusted with ignored his order and nocked their own arrows, all of them aiming for the one who would burn their very homes to the ground, and loosing as one, their movements more fluid than they should have ever been in their state. The moment their arrows passed a certain point, the vast majority of them simply scattered with the surging winds. All but one, as the huntsmaster's own weapon pierced through the wall of wind and whizzed towards the eye-hole of the sorcerer's crown, only to be disdainfully slapped away with a lazy flick of the hand, cute. The bored voice carried across the entire battlefield, making the Bosmer feel as if the dark elf was speaking into their ear directly. "Carvani," he spoke, and a diminutive Dunmer clad in the traditional garbs of his house perked up. "See those gawking fools over there?" Hearing the short elf's answer, he nodded. "I no longer wish to." Even the short elf looked at him with some confusion at that, but only for a moment before his face twisted into a sharp-toothed grin that scared the shit out of some of the more sharp-eyed Bosmer watching, and he scurried away to his fellow house members. Mere moments later, the entire Telvanni contingent rose their hands or foci as one, and the battlefield was suffused with so much magicka, the sheen of it could be seen with the naked eye. By this point, some 20 seconds had passed since the forest was turned to ash, and some of the more quick-witted Bosmer had begun their retreat, hoping to reposition themselves while the enemy was gloating at them. Sadly, it was once again far, far too late for that, as the chaotic mess of spells on the Dunmeri side finished synchronizing, and a storm of the elements descended upon the lines of the wood elves. Raven's point of view. Literal kilometers of land gone, just like that. The morbid thought only served to twist my grin further. There was just something beautiful about so much destruction wrought by mortal hands. That ought to be a few thousand of the fuckers at least, I noted aloud. The firestorm still danced atop the enemy's previous position, leaving no room for doubt as to what happened to the terrified cannibals. We could probably ignore them and simply take the city now. Nerevar noted, "They won't be recovering from that for hours at least." "Days, probably," I corrected lazily. "Having their most veteran members simply get disappeared isn't something one simply gets over." A dark chuckle left me. I do oh so love the smell of war crimes in the morning. In the background, the Telvanni finally stopped their barrage of spells. "Still," I hummed as the air began to clear out. "There is a barely fortified camp some distance away, practically begging for us to destroy it." I rubbed my hands eagerly. It would be incredibly rude of us to refuse the offer. The ancient elf held back a sigh. Please tell me you aren't just going to throw bodies in there because you can. Well, I cleared my throat. Not bodies per se. Focusing inwardly, I felt for the echoes of the recently slain Bosma, their souls already slowly flickering out as their patron dragged them away into Etherius. It was a good thing I didn't need those. The memories of the world and the imprints of the hopeful army of hunters slowly connected to my will. And I felt my spell taking hold. I rejected the memories that immediately surged towards me and redirected them back to their origins, my veritable sea of magicka following but a blink after. It took me a fair bit of time to modify this particular spell back in the Imperial City, but the sight that awaited me as I commanded them all to arise was very much so worth the effort, as thousands of sadly temporary shades rose from their ashen graves in all their color-coded glory. The Telvanni behind me turned utterly silent as I simply pointed at the forest too far to be turned to ash, and wordlessly gave the command. The shades surged as one, and mere moments later the first screams of terror and pain began to spread from within. I do oh so love. I pretended to clap dust from my hands as I repeated, the smell of war crimes in the morning. General POV, some half an hour earlier. General Servius Tullius of the Tamrielic Empire felt his annoyance growing as yet another legionary ballista was struck by a burning boulder from atop the walls of Arenthia. The artillery barrage that had commenced about an hour earlier was still doing good damage to the Dominion defensive positions, but the attrition they were forced to take in turn was a hard pill to swallow, even if it was certainly worth the cost. The smattering of Imperial battle mages and Falmer did their best to protect their positions from the enemy mages, but the High Elves were not renowned for their magical prowess for no reason, and more often than not, they found ways around the defenses his soldiers could put up. Still, as another tower was sundered by an enchanted ballista bolt, he found himself grunting in annoyed acceptance. Wars were not won without sacrifice. A fact the Thalmor seemed to understand as well, as mere minutes later, a loud and piercing war horn sounded out from atop the battlements, and the gates of Arenthia opened. Ready the infantry for enemy sally. Tullius immediately commanded, Hrongar, you have the center. Farron, you are to flank from the north. He paused only briefly before adding, Varan, take your best, and do the same from the south. Be wary of ambush. The officers all took their orders without a word and rushed out to do as they were told. Tullius nodded to himself and pointed at one of his runners. Get me Furious and Battleborn. Have them start forming their men up first. The young man saluted and ran off, leaving Tullius to plan his next moves. Multiple formations of High Elves clad in gleaming black and gold marched out of the city of Arenthia, the crumbling and under-maintained walls of the city practically falling apart around them, even as one of the present Archmagi focused on keeping them functional. A good way to waste human legion munitions, and a terrible way to maintain morale. Banners of the Eagle of Alanor fluttered in the wind as orders were given out, and the Elven Legion began their advance, their more lightly armored Bosma allies marching out behind them with bows or spears in hand. If their orderly display was meant to cow their enemy into hesitating, it failed utterly, for across them the First Legion of Skyrim formed up with practiced ease, housecarls and veterans from each and every hold locking shields with each other as only those who spilled blood together before could. The two battle lines advanced at each other, stopping just outside missile range, but only for a short moment, as a silent command was given on the Dominion's end, and the Bosma contingent ran past the blocks of Altmer infantry. There was no command to form up, or ready a volley for that matter, by the Wood Elven officers, their subordinates merely knocking their arrows as they willed and immediately beginning to pepper the Imperial lines with an almost hungry look in their eyes. The Nords immediately rose their shields, forming an impromptu turtle formation, and began advancing through the rain of arrows, a rhythmic grunting chant spreading from them so as to keep cohesion as they marched through the field of death. The Altmer were not quite so foolish as to allow them to do as they willed, however, and soon bolts of chain lightning began blasting the Nordic formations from atop the walls, some of them fizzling out due to the protective enchantments of the shields, some of them blocked by the few mages present in the human ranks, but the vast majority of them hitting home and rapidly cooking the men and women alive within their armor, and opening up the formations to further Bosmary arrows. For a short time, the Nords fell in droves, their casualties only increasing as the Ultima infantry finally came into range and unleashed short-range spells upon them, burning and impaling the humans before moving in with their swords. An act that quickly proved itself a terrible, terrible mistake. Like a beast that had tasted blood, the Nords all let out furious war cries and threw themselves into the elven line without an ounce of hesitation, their greater size and strength easily overpowering the elves' greater grace as they were confined in place by their own formation. The Bosmer were not spared the counterattack either, as those who were not unfortunate enough to end up on the nasty end of a Nordic javelin or throwing axe soon found themselves under rapid crossbow fire from their north and south, the south being particularly terrible as figures in blackened steel plate and cloaks of white fur unleashed a wave of death into the Dominion flank. And they, unlike their human counterparts, had proper magi protection, so the attempts of the Ultima to simply remove the valuable troops quickly proved themselves useless. The Thalmor general atop the walls frowned at the development. His troops were reacting as they should, holding the line despite far too many casualties taken to mere humans. But he was not dealing with only humans, as he had to remind himself, whatever little respect he still held for his distant grey-skinned cousins, disappearing rather quickly as he saw hundreds of his own be turned into little more than hedgehog caricatures by those infernal crossbows. Marvelous weapons that they were, they needed removing as soon as possible. His magi seemed to agree and readied themselves to sally out and destroy the few practitioners, saving the Imperials from annihilation. He gave the order and called for his signifier. The Bosmer he had hidden in the trees ought to make themselves useful right about now. The horn sounded out once again, and the general felt his hairs standing on end, whether due to excitement or as a premonition he would not know until his last breath. Because just then, the forest that held his veteran force of huntsmen simply disappeared, the verdant growths rapidly shrinking and then outright disintegrating into ash that belonged more in Morrowind than it ever would Valenwood. Ah, the suddenly very numb Dominion general realized he is here. As if to enunciate his realization, what parts of the forest that were not turned to ash were suddenly incinerated by waves of fire, his diviner quickly informing him that hundreds of the damned Telvanni were currently all throwing spells at his auxiliaries, like their lives depended on it. His keen-eyed allies down on the field also seemed to notice what just happened, and their morale began to flag. There was no winning the battle like this, he quickly realized. Call for Tellurian. He ordered, he is to cover the infantry as they retreat. He turned to his messenger, and send word to Cameron, have him reposition his soldiers into small pockets. The enemy diviners are too potent for him to stay in one place. Once more, the world felt the need to prove him right as he felt a wave of silent dread spreading across the field. Moments later, the very same archmage who had single-handedly been keeping the walls together appeared next to him. The tall, proud, and perfectly groomed elf that radiated power, a living paragon of what it meant to be Ultima, gave him a clipped nod and readied his spells. The war horn sounded out once more, and the Dominion cohorts began disengaging from the Nords, who, to the general's surprise, seemed to simply accept this change and hold back, reforming their shield walls as they dragged their wounded behind their lines, or throwing a final volley of spiteful javelins if they were able. The human legionaries then began clearing the way, just moments before their own war horn sounded out, and the general realized what they were doing. Hundreds and hundreds of humans stood ready, mounted atop stocky war horses, some clad in legion garb, while others in lamella and carrying banners of a golden horse's head with its hairs braided on a white background. "Tellurian!" he called, a bit of fear entering his voice as the human cavalry lowered their lances. "Stop them!" The archmage did not react to his lack of deference and swung his free hand out, his elaborately carved staff, glowing with power, unleashed as spikes rose from the ground and in the cavalry's path. And yet the human charge did not slow down for even a second. What are they doing? The general leaned his hands against the battlements, eyes wide in confusion. Are they trying to kill themselves? The sudden, pained grunt of his chief mage quickly answered that question as he saw a shimmer of power pass across the field, simply disintegrating the spikes as if they were never there. The figure suddenly appearing above the charging humans, removing all doubts as to the culprit. General Tellurian's voice was grave as he spoke. "I recommend that you flee now." He rounded on the Archmage with fury in his eyes, but found his words abandoning him as he saw the previously prideful and indomitable elf shivering in place, face pale and beads of sweat running down what parts of his skin were visible under his robes. A screeching noise pierced the battlefield, and the defensive wards the Archmage tried putting up shattered utterly as something grabbed onto him and yanked. The pathetic scream of their proud symbol did more to destroy Ultima morale than the artillery barrage and retreat ever could, draining their will from them just as the human cavalry reached its target and the field turned once more to chaos and butchery. The Thalmor general turned to his command staff, ready to keep fighting until his last breath, even as he understood that there would be no victory here, only to find all of his comrades of over 4 decades strewn across the stone bastion in pieces. The smell hit him just as the sight did, and he couldn't help the bile from rising in his throat. And then a large hand landed on his shoulder, and he very hesitantly turned to see who had the fucking order to. A large yet slender golem of ebony greeted him with far too much cheer in its cold voice. "Hello there, General Canorian." He wanted to scream, to thrash and to threaten, but found that he lacked the energy to, as a surge of pain nearly knocked him out, causing his eyes to instinctually look for the source. The stress of the battle, now joined by the shock of seeing a clawed hand sinking into his guts, was far too much for the elf, and his heart simply gave out. "General." The automaton poked him exactly where she knew she would cause the most pain, only to realize he was no longer moving. She stared at her prey, and then at her hand, and then simply threw him against the nearby battlement. "What a waste of my time," she grumbled as she shouldered her eponymous greatsword. "I hope your mages are not nearly as pathetic." They weren't, but only just. 516, Chapter 1. 129, A Hunt in the Wild. Raven's point of view. The city of Arenthia was already being overrun by the time I slowly lowered myself to the ground, the limp body of the Ultima mage hanging in my grip and drawing the horrified looks of many of the high elves still in positions to observe me while their comrades died in droves. Those very gazes turned downright numb when I simply tossed the poor idiot away like so much wet rag and used the now freed hand to summon a cigar and take a long drag. The sensation made all the more pleasant by the delectable, impotent fury I could taste in the air. Just as I began marching to the gate, now broken by the eager Nords, Umbra's form blurred right next to me, her blade pristine despite the air of death surrounding her. "Had fun?" I asked without facing her. Her irritated decapitation of the mage I yoinked as he tried crawling away was all the answer I'd need. Even if she did surprise me by actually responding, "They are too weak." Or maybe I simply made you too strong. I smirked cheekily at the murder-happy statue and started walking once more. "Come on then, the rest will join us soon enough, and I always was curious about Bosmary architecture." Or how it crumbled went unsaid. The automaton did not bother answering, but she did fall in behind me as told. The gate of the large manor complex, serving as the local Thalmor command center, buckled inwards as the shade of Karstag whacked it with a big fancy hammer I made, the rest of my shadowy goon squad rushing inside and butchering the terrified high elves within, Umbra languidly strolling after them with her sword shouldered. It is a good thing they did not bring their families here. Savos, who had joined me in the meantime, as he no longer needed to hide amongst the artillery, comments, "Playing host to them would have been rather awkward." "Keeping them from simply getting disappeared, you mean?" I snort. "We should have sent all the Nords to elsewhere, far smaller number of Ultima or their supporters there." He hums in agreement as we both enter the complex. "True." He mutters, "However, I still feel the familiarity the troops have with you is too big of an advantage to simply give up on. The fresh legion from Skyrim or the ones from Cyrodiil would probably not react very well to you simply erasing entire forests on a whim." "That little shit Jeffrey started it." I snort. Should have just let me subjugate his chosen people in peace. He too makes an amused noise, not one whit surprised I was more than willing to talk shit directly to a god's face, quite. However, I still feel like you are escalating things to a breaking point again. Hey, I didn't want to initially. I stressed the last word, but the rat bastard decided to start blessing all the damn Bosmer in the forest, and just letting him do that like a good little mortal was simply not in the books for me. And ruining a forest was the most expedient way of doing that. He quirks an eyebrow, pausing his questioning as we enter the chambers of the Thalmor justiciar in charge of the local populace, said elf currently strewn across the floor with a large gash across his neck. Don't give me that look. I can already feel Kine pouting at me from all the way in Aetherius. I grumble as I step over the pile of shit on the floor. Yifre is like most the other gods, rather spread out and limited in what he can effectively do to influence the world. Meaning he needs a medium, yes. Savos follows along, so what you did was simply remove the medium. I nod sagely. Truly, if you are not solving your problems with fire, you are simply not using enough. He shakes his head and chuckles. Such wisdom do I rarely hear. Well then, I pause, feeling devious once more. Since you are in such need of wisdom, go ahead and look for the correspondence at your leisure. I will go and provide overwatch for the army. He deadpans. You just want to see the city burn. I am not that bad. I most definitely did not whine. He just rolls his eyes and shoos me away, summoning a couple of Dremora to help him in his task. Which is how I find myself ascending the tree manor the Bosmery tree huggers somehow managed to make look actually seemly and not like yet another one of their shitty little Luddite hovels. I pause just before opening the door that led to a large balcony overlooking the city. Hold up, am I actually that biased against them? You only noticed that now, Pops? Scorch deadpans as he materializes atop my shoulder. Oh, do get off my back. I scoff and push the door open. Imagine expecting actual civilization from a bunch of tree worshippers. And what delightful civilization it was once one's eyes were opened. A perfect blend of stone and tree, somehow flowing into each other to make a seamlessly bound crossing between the two, wide and well-ordered streets bordered on many ends by gardens as often as homes or open-air forums of some sort or another. It was too bad I knew for certain this was all just because Arenthia was practically in Cyrodiil geographically and not at all due to Bosmer civility. Rolling my eyes at my reinforced disdain for an entire people, I cupped my chin, eyes absently following the thousands of soldiers swarming the entire city as the Thalmor made a fighting retreat to the southern gatehouse, their numbers dwindling rapidly as the city held some 10,000 troops tops and they were trying to fight off 3 whole legions. The rest were likely stationed beyond the Bosmery camps, waiting to serve as battle reserves once we were drawn into a prolonged battle. That is what you get when you bank it all on a single plan. I mutter with narrowed eyes, seeing an Ultima chucklefuck setting an entire district on fire to cover their retreat. Yes, very cool, Pops. Scorch bobs his head sarcastically. Can I go eat them now? In lieu of an answer, I simply teleport him atop the Thalmor arsonist, the insane fucking bird cheering loudly as he pounced on the poor woman who now had to learn to walk blind. Well, at least she wouldn't be blind for long. Now then, I mutter oh so thoughtfully and scan the battlefield once more, surge appearing in my free hand. How about we wrap this whole thing up? By the time I lowered my staff, and the final unit of Thalmor I did not deem worthy of my personal attention rode out of the southern gate, I was almost feeling sorry for my enemies. It was after all really difficult to keep to your pride and honor and fight on while searing ash formed inside your lungs. My usual bodyguard detail returned then, all of them completely spotless, and escorting a messenger from Tullius who quickly informed me that the local civilian leadership had all been rounded up and were being gathered in the city hall. Should have made the fun part last longer. I pouted as I marched once more to deal with fucking politics. General point of view, a mixed unit of legionaries clad in solitude plate marched cautiously across the field of ash, now dominating Arenthia's west, their steps speaking of caution, while many of their gazes were filled with awe instead. Seeing a map get repainted in real time was a rare event, even on Nirn. Arenthia had fallen a full day earlier, and the people were mostly pacified, leaving a large number of the soldiers with not much to do but drill and patrol, as they couldn't chase after the Thalmor through the obviously hostile forest without moving out in force. It was one of such patrols going missing that had the veterans of Kynesgrove marching out of the city's relative comfort with orders to look for their lost comrades. "This is their last position, then?" Legate Zarok asked the Telvanni next to him, the orc clad in heavy imperial plate, looking rather angry that it was his unit that was hand-picked to chase after the ambushers. Someone had to have out for him, he was certain of it. The spindly elf directed him, with a look that said all he needed to know about her opinion on his entire kind, but did answer the question, "This is where they were last seen, yes." Her voice was completely without emotion, as she too was dragged out of bed for this. "I detect signs of a struggle in the air, but something is obscuring my sight." "Great," the orc growled, "so we are going in blind." He ignored the Telvanni's utter lack of care for his concern and turned to his unit. "Targan, do you see anything?" The shortest member of his cohort steps out with a sly expression on his Bosmary face. "What? Just because my ma was from this shithole, I'm supposed to know how to navigate it?" Zarok leaned in threateningly. "Yes." "Fair enough." The elf shrugged and focused on the forest, giving it a good 10 seconds before speaking up once again. I can see some scuff marks on those trees over yonder." He points far into the distance. "Someone got dragged off that away." "So they entered the forest." Zarok's face twitches. "Great." "Probably a trap, boss." The Bosmer pipes in. The orc grunts. "I am aware." He sighs before straightening up and squaring his shoulders. "Cohort, form up." Expression grim, he leads his men into the forest, even as his blood begins to pump in excitement. And then the chanting began, soon followed by the smell of blood. Rivers of it, if his nose was not lying to him. The soldiers of the cohort shuffled uncomfortably as the noise grows louder and louder with each step. The Telvanni mage looking increasingly pale until she finally raised a hand and shouted, "Stop!" Zarok very nearly ignored her, as his blood urged him to face the upcoming challenge, but he had learned to trust the intuition of mages over the years and turned to face her. "What is it?" Unfortunately, all the woman could get out at that point was a pained gurgle, as a trio of arrows now stuck out from her throat. Zarok immediately roared, "Ambush!" and grabbed onto his weapons, unsheathing the paired axes just in time to parry a lunging wood elf clad in leather armor and antlered headdress and bury his offhand in his gut. He headbutted the screaming fool, bringing his weapons up once more and cutting the hand of another Bosmer who was gunning for Targan. The loyalist wood elf just barely twitching back far enough to buy the orc time to save him. The other legionaries, veterans all, fared well, but over 24 were still dead by the time their ambushers began their retreat further into the forest. The Nords and few orcs in the formation barely managing to rein themselves in from rushing after them. "Check the wounded," Zarok ordered, and leaned over to the still twitching mage, ripping the arrows out of her without a care for the pain he caused her. He poured his soul regeneration potion in the open wound, making it close up rapidly as the woman gasped. "Damn, barbarian!" She coughed as she was dragged up, very nearly stumbling as she was let free and hissing at her rescuer. "Do you get off on torturing people?" Zarok growled and leaned into her face, reminding her of just how much larger and currently more dangerous he was. "The words you are looking for are, 'Thank you for saving my ass, Legate, sir. Now shut up and stay in formation. We are going after them.'" If he were able to see from his back, he would see the Dunmer mage shivering, and not in fear. He barked out more orders, satisfied to learn 7 of his comrades were saved with a rapid application of potions, and led his troops further into the woods. Not even for one moment did the chanting slow. By the time they passed a small bend in the narrow woodland path, the smell of blood had turned utterly overwhelming, and Zarok's whole cohort was almost relieved as they came upon their foe. The wood elves fell in droves as the legionaries showered them in javelins, no doubt having expected the legionaries to retreat or take their time reordering themselves. After an ambush, they were not prepared for their dogged pursuit. Those who were not immediately cut down fled further in and drew the cohort into a large opening, where even more Bosma clad in shamanistic robes and fetishes chanted around a large pool of blood, their lips bloody and their feet surrounded by even bloodier legion armor. Just as Zarok stepped into the open, eyes increasingly bloodshot at what he saw, the pool of blood in the middle of the clearing began to bubble up, and the air was charged with a dark presence. The crowd of elves turned silent, and fast as a shadow, a large beast stepped out from within. Its hands were clawed in bone, its face the elongated skull of a deer crested by imposing antlers. Blackened fur hid the rest of it from sight, but not to the extent that one would miss the fact the creature was built like a slender version of a particularly tall troll. Every single aspect of the creature looked to be built to kill and terrify. But the legionaries once dragged from Solitude's slums had experienced far worse than a mere beast from the nightmares of the Bosma. And as one roared out in fury, throwing their secondary javelins at the gathered wood elves without mercy, and nailing many of them into what remained of the corpses of the cohort the filthy cannibals had devoured, the beast reacted quickly to Zarok's own weapon, the axe spinning through the air, merely clipping one of its antlers instead of ramming itself into its head as it leapt away, moving just barely fast enough that a mortal eye could still perceive it. Then it disappeared from sight, its natural camouflage allowing it to move across the battlefield and only reappear as it gored a gnawed legionary who had just finished stabbing a wailing Bosma through an artery he knew would make him die in agony. Another legionary, a Dunmer this time, blasted the beast with a wave of fire, but it merely threw itself on all fours, crawling rapidly towards the offending elf with murder in its eyes as it grabbed onto his leg and promptly disemboweled him with its teeth. Through his steel armor, 5 more legionaries died in increasingly gruesome ways as the beast painted itself red in their blood before Zarok managed to reach it, the axe he had thrown leaping back into his grip as he slammed both enchanted weapons into the creature's hide. Or at least he attempted to. Its claws flashed out, batting one of his weapons out of the way, while its neck twisted as an owl's would, allowing it to bite into the orc's forearm and nearly rip the hand off if not for the spike of steel that nearly struck it in the eye, the projectile bouncing off its skeletal face as it flinched away. Zarok did not bother thanking his savior as he allowed the rage in his blood to take hold and roared in berserk fury, his axes blurring after the flinching figure and burying themselves into its hide. And yet for all his strength, the creature looked to be far too resilient to slay in a few strikes, and an orc's rage, potent as it was, would never be renowned for its staying power. His blurring strikes and the Telvanni mage's spells wounded the beast, but solely on its surface, the blood leaking off it already hardening over the wounds as it began to overpower the orc's flagging strength. A sudden swing followed his final strike into the beast's side, and he felt his helm crumple and cheek nearly be ripped off as its claws made contact with his face, the pain serving to jolt him awake and out of his rage just long enough to see the creature loom over him, ready to rip him to pieces. Except, just as it leapt at him, a distantly familiar glaive slammed into its throat, the blast of crimson lightning throwing it back and away as the imposing form of Dagoth's bodyguard rushed after it, eyes aglow with power. The creature growled in pain, immediately focusing on the new attacker as it rushed forward in an attempt to gore him, and right into the path of a swinging greatsword as a second automaton appeared on the battlefield, cutting into the beast's face with such ease, a small part of Zarok felt offended. The taller automaton gave the still ongoing duel one last look and turned away, strolling over to the orc and speaking in a disdainful if bored tone. "Are these all the barbarians you managed to find, meatbag?" "So far," Zarok grunted as he chugged down a lesser healing potion. "Looks to be the entire missing cohort as well." His face screamed at him in pain as he scowled, but his anger was far beyond his good sense at the moment. "Very well." The automaton nodded. "Clean up and ready to move back to the city. My master will want to know what you saw." "Right." The orc gave his comrades a quick look and found that most of them were fine as the beast did not get to them, and the Bosma were a bunch of pathetic worshippers instead of warriors. "And what about—" he went to ask, but realized the automaton had disappeared in his moment of distraction. Completely unsurprised, he looked to the still ongoing battle, if it could even be called that, as he saw the new automaton simply slap away the beast's desperate claw slash, before slowly, agonizingly sinking its sword into its groin and then dragging the sword upwards. The orc then enjoyed a full minute of complete bliss as he listened to the horned fucker's pained whimpers before it was bifurcated. Such was his enjoyment, in fact, that he did not notice as Akula Khan appeared next to him again, what looked to be the most elaborately dressed Bosmer of the bunch slung over his shoulder. "Get to work, meatbag." And so he did, ensuring no wood elf save for those under his command still lived as they gathered up any and all identifying marks of the slain and devoured legionaries before they marched out of the forest, the lot of them feeling completely safe as the two automatons went with them. Raven's point of view. The report on public order I have been reading is carefully lowered to the desk I was sat at, as a quintet of figures strolled into the study I had requisitioned off the very dead Justiciar Junior, Umbra. I nodded at my creations and turned to the orc, who now sported a fresh facial scar. "And Zarok, long time no see, you little shit." The wood elf clad in legion armor choked on air at my address, and the Telvanni that entered with them looked like she withered a bit at not being named as the orc was. Maybe she should have tried not being a middling diviner and healer well into her second century if she wanted attention then. The fucking slacker. "Sir?" The orc saluted, obviously not wanting to listen to my bullshit. "There was an incident." "And this was not forwarded to Tullius." "Why?" I quirk an eyebrow. "A magical incident," he corrects with a grunt. "Well, that explains why both Umbra and Junior are here." I mentally shrugged and straightened in my seat. You have my curiosity. One very bloody explanation later. I cupped my chin as I leaned back into my seat. Didn't think he would react that aggressively. But I do suppose it makes sense to go all out. "Sir?" Zarok asks. "The wild hunt," I answered, voice raised from its previous mutter, "a Bosmer sacrificial ritual in tribute of Yifre involving a lot of cannibalism, as you've no doubt come to learn. The three mortals in the room blanched to differing degrees, lets them transform themselves into powerful beasts." I went on, "You got very lucky." Zarok's face warps into a frown. "How?" "A proper wild hunt usually involves an entire horde being formed, or so I have read." I explain that you managed to get there before the ritual could truly get underway, speaks of either good decision-making or immense dumb luck. He merely grunts. "Your Grace." The Telvanni speaks up hesitantly. Turning away from the orc, I face the Dunmer spellwright. "Sira Eris, Your Grace." She introduces herself. "I was wondering if you would permit me access to the beast's carcass." I raise a hand. "You can have it after my preliminary examination, so long as the legate here agrees. I have neither the time nor inclination to research the phenomenon at the moment, and I sincerely doubt this is the last one Geoffrey is going to throw at us." She stiffens at the god name drop, but still remembers to bow her head in gratitude a moment later. But would I really be myself if I didn't ruin it for her immediately? Do note, Zarok, that the carcass is rather valuable, so do be sure to not give it up for free. The poor Telvanni woman looks at me with pure betrayal in her eyes, while the orc merely snorts. He'd have probably called me a cunt directly to my face if he didn't think his Nord friends would lynch him for the act. "And you," I point at the Bosmer, all the while scrying him for potential betrayal and finding nothing. "I know the Empire had Bosmer in its ranks, but which idiot got it into their head to drag you here while we attack Valenwood?" The short elf shrugs. "Was born in Skyrim. Da was a Nord, so I don't really care about this damp-ass scrotum of Tamriel." Blinking at the blunt statement, I let out a snort and shake my head. "Well, so long as you don't share your kinsfolk's dietary habits, I frankly do not care." "My lord, I am a vegetarian." The fucking Bosmer deadpans. My howls of laughter quickly made the legionaries shuffle out in fear. 517, Chapter 130, The Woodland March. The instant the trio left the study, my amused expression shifted and darkened, giving way to pure, unfiltered disgust. An entire cohort, eaten like cattle. I scowl. Scorch pops into reality atop the table of his own will. Should have just burned the whole forest. He chirps merrily, even as I notice a hint of rage behind his eyes. Show the Noirs exactly why they should keep their degeneracy to themselves. Tempting, very tempting. I hum, feeling my disgust slowly settle below the sea of apathy I usually felt for people who were not directly relevant to me, but escalating like. That is why I have multiple Daedra in open war against me, and I should learn the damn lesson already. Coward, the bird of doom chirps. I flick him in the beak, drawing a betrayed squeak from the little shit. The bird speaks true, descendant. The lantern sitting at the table's edge lights up. You should burn this disgusting little forest and settle it with proper elves, not these, near humans playing at being their betters. And call it New Morrowind, no doubt. My face flattens into a deadpan. The fact a small part of me wants to agree is mildly disturbing. Come over to the dark side, Scorch crows deeply. We have cookies. No, I flick him again, bad war criminal. The checklist must be fulfilled. He declares even as he recoils, search your feelings, you know it to be true. I give the bird a dubious look, but cannot help but notice my earlier anger had all but left me smart-ass chicken. I roll my eyes and pat his head a bit too hard. Oi! I ignore the indignant little shit and keep patting, even as I see my orb begin to pulsate with power and activate it with my free hand. Septim Dagoth World Domination Bureau. Dragon Overlady, Riverhold is ours. Just got the smug little shit in charge of the garrison to call for a citywide surrender. Dragon Overlady, also World Domination, really. Big D, what are we doing right now? Dragon Overlady, fighting a war to unite. Tamriel. Big D, exactly. Dragon Overlady. Dragon Overlady, the mortals must never know. Big D, my lips are sealed. Big D, also I took Arenthia a full day ago. Slowpoke. Dragon Overlady, it isn't my fault Julius wanted to take things slow. Big D, excuses, excuses. Dragon Overlady, oh please, you got Tullius. You probably didn't have to do a thing. Big D, no comment. Dragon Overlady, that man is so beyond the ponce leading my armies, it isn't even funny. Big D, Gracchus is a passable leader. Dragon Overlady, easy for you to say. Big D, exactly. Dragon Overlady, ass. Big D, happy face. Dragon Overlady, anyway, how are things looking on your front? Changing the topic, are we? Another win for me. Big D, got rid of 2/3 of a Thalmor legion and a large chunk of their auxiliaries turned their ambush against them. The new leader seems to be a bit smarter than the previous one and immediately started a retreat all the way to Sylvanar. Dragon Overlady, isn't that just delaying the inevitable? Big D, this entire conflict is as far as the Dominion is concerned. But no, as much as I'd like to say things are going perfectly, the fact most of them escaped even with heavy casualties means I will have to slog through constant ambushes, and these Bosma cunts are better at it than the Argonians will ever be. Dragon Overlady. Suddenly I am feeling quite happy that I have to march through a desert. Big D, can't have the dainty Septim get a rash in the forest, divines forbid. Dragon Overlady, accurate. Chuckling to myself, I send the following. Big D, you can go ahead and brag about your victory now. Dragon Overlady, I have no idea what you are talking about. And then she proceeded to do exactly as I teased, in great and exhaustive detail. Big D, so the dragons can get soul fatigue. Dragon Overlady, you already thought about it. Big D, it makes perfect sense. Nothing exists that is infinite in power or energy, so there must be some kind of limit to their immortality. Dragon Overlady, you say it almost like it is a good thing. Big D, because it really is. Useful as they are now, you need to have some kind of way to threaten them that isn't soul death or a timeout. Dover are literally incapable of being bothered by the passage of time. Dragon Overlady, so what? I just threaten to repeatedly kill and revive them in rapid succession if they don't play nice. Big D, I do so love it when you read my mind. I feel a mental shrug as she responds. Dragon Overlady, oh well, most of them are cunts, so they deserve it. Big D, and you get to rub it in that they get to keep their souls at your mercy. A perfect win-win for corralling them. Dragon Overlady, Odahviing will probably be amused by the idea, if anything. Dragon Overlady, torturing my siblings aside, Dune should fall within the week. With the new Breville Riverhold Road your automatons are building, our supply lines should be pretty much untouchable on both fronts. which was the main goal of the surprise offensive in the first place. I hum in satisfaction. Big D. Good. After you are done with that, you should rush with all haste to Rimmon. If you capture the Mene and sprinkle enough propaganda, Khajiiti support for the Dominion will dry up overnight. Dragon Overlady, that is the idea, even if I feel it will not be that easy. Big D, we need to use the Dominion's confusion as much as we can while they are putting out fires back in Alinor. Ripping an entire province from their control would ensure our victory beyond any doubt. Dragon Overlady, doubt? Ha. Oi, Pops, scorched chirps, more noirs coming to bother us. Of course, I grumble and return to the orb. Big D, I have to get going now, work to do and all that. Dragon Overlady, I probably should as well. Dragon Overlady, stay safe out there. Big D, you as well, and make sure to crack a few skulls for me. The more cuntish the Thalmor, the better. Dragon Overlady, as long as you do the same. Exactly as I put the orb down, there is a knock on my door, and a moment later, a white cloak peeks into the room. Your Grace, the auxiliary reserve has just arrived at the gates of the city. Nodding, I say, I will be out in a minute. He bows and closes the door. Closing my eyes briefly, I allow myself a moment of peace and quiet, letting the small amount of mental fatigue building in my mind dissipate as if I had just taken a nap, before snapping them back open and standing up. There was work to be done. We marched out of Arenthia 2 full days later, the fresh reinforcements from Cyrodiil under Hasseldor's leadership, taking hold of the city and the roads behind us. We began our rapid advance south through Valenwood, only to rather swiftly be met with an unavoidable problem. See, the roads to Arenthia were, while still in complete disrepair, actually well built and relatively well maintained, in the past few centuries at least, which meant the forest and overgrowth didn't quite get to overtake all of it just yet. That was most assuredly not the case for the road leading south. Oh, there was certainly enough room for merchants to pass through, even if they would always be at risk of fucking their carts up at the slightest misalignment. A legion, though? Good fucking luck with that. Every step we took was followed by some kind of problem arising within the ranks, anything between simple accidents to overturned supplies to patrols disappearing in the night. And as if that wasn't enough, my prediction proved itself true a mere 2 days into our advance. Bosmary raiding parties, joined periodically by small groups of transformed beasts, kept nipping at our metaphorical ankles whenever they could get an attack in, usually moving in from multiple directions so as to keep our most powerful mages from simply blocking their way. That they were willing to throw away hundreds of lives for every attack was morbidly impressive. That it worked was insulting. So insulting, in fact, that I quickly went fuck it, and decided to stop playing by the book. I teleported back to Arenthia and promptly cursed a path through the forest, expanding the roadway considerably before abusing my ridiculous magicka reserves to rise condensed stone roads and fortified campsites, stationing garrisons of fresh troops to guard the way back as I did. And just like that, the enemy strategy crumbled, their slow creeping surround of my army losing its bite as any kind of attempt at cutting us off and starving us out was made to be impossible by my presence. With a renewed vigor, my forces reached the lake town of Greenhill early on the 5th day of our march, resulting in another quick siege that turned into open battle as a few Bosmary cohorts disobeyed the orders of their Thalmor overseers and rushed at our flanks to help the beleaguered defenders. Tullius immediately deployed the Whiterun cavalry, and while they did cut the wood elven skirmishers down like so much grass, the Thalmor general, whom I had scryed to be named Elendil, used the momentary opening in our lines to send his magi to punish the push, killing many of the Nords in a sudden bombardment. None of said mages managed to escape, as they were swiftly shown just how irritating they made themselves by yours truly. Elendil evidently saw he would gain no advantage here, and once more decided on a retreat, my sight allowing me to sense the growing discontent in his ranks as he once more turned his back to us. He would have to face us in force next time, or he risked losing control of his army, and likely his neck, if one considered how these coups usually went. Greenhill was fully occupied mere hours later, and I once more went to work over-fortifying the place and cursing it with enough power that Yefra the fucking meddler couldn't do as he wanted. Then came the routine pacification, meeting with the locals, assuring them that no, we were not about to enslave or devour them. That the latter was considered a real possibility by the dumbfuck almost made me consider what should not be considered again. The evening came, and I was just admiring my own foresight as I observed the local architecture, or the lack thereof, as everything was a fucking treehouse with not even a rock in sight, when my orb shone once again. Former paper pusher, Raven, get over here. Big D, what is it? Former paper pusher, you are going to want to see this, trust me on this. Frowning and momentarily concerned, I activated my sight fully, scanning the entire region before centering in on Savos's position some 3 hours away from Greenhill, quickly finding him to be staring down a group of elves that felt to be appreciably magically capable Bosmer, with a unit of my sworn Mer on his side alongside a squad of Dremora lords. Sympathizers, outcasts, or interesting enemies, I wondered, even as I cast the teleportation spell. The first thing I noticed as I appeared next to my grandfather was the settlement behind the oddly tall spear wall of Bosmer. Namely the fact that it was surrounded by a proper stone wall and was not made up of a bunch of tree houses like the rest of them. In fact, the buildings looked to be distantly familiar to something I had seen not too long before now. My gaze moved from the small town and to the elves worriedly pointing their spears at us. Their leader a particularly well-armed and armored specimen carrying an elaborate-looking glaive. His good choices aside, my eyes narrowed as I got a better look at their faces, builds and outfits. They were definitely elves, but they were also taller and felt more magically potent than most Bosmer I had seen so far. Even their skin tone seemed to be somewhat lighter than the rest of their kind, and they were actually armored in proper steel and moonstone. Hold on, taller than Wood Elf? Check human skin tone. Check decent magicka even in the non-magi. Check armor, weapons, and architecture I had seen before. Check, well. I clapped my hand slowly, drawing the immediate attention of everyone present, and then their fear as I allowed my magic to be felt in the air. You were certainly right, Gramps. This is interesting. Because I was currently not looking at a rogue group of Bosmer soldiers that had escaped our battle, but a town militia made up of its Aliad residents. 518, Chapter 131, The Eagle Rears Back. General POV earlier, Hural, or Lord Hural as his kin insisted, wiped the sweat from his forehead as the final Bosmer miscreant was cut down by his warriors, his bloody glaive retracting from the still twitching body under him, an act he had repeated numerous times in the past few hours. The Aliad warrior twirled his weapon through the air, throwing bits of blood off its edge, as he did before shouldering it, and facing his subordinates. Did we get all of them? None escaped. His gruff second-in-command answered. The fools got too excited, rushed too deeply into us, almost as if we were an afterthought, and they were running from something. Greenhill has probably fallen then. Hural gravely concluded. The sheer speed of it worries me. The older elf across him quirks an eyebrow. Think they will find us? It is only a matter of time, Hural confirmed absently, eyes distant. The rumors he had heard over the past few months and the reports of his own scouts made it an inevitability. A hand landing atop his shoulder nearly made flinch in surprise as the gruff elf leaned in on him. We will deal with things as they come, no point in overthinking. Now come, the bodies won't strip themselves. Never know with these tree worshippers. He snorted and they got to work. Hours later their troop marched back to their settlement, the beautiful walls surrounding it making many of them sigh in relief at finally reaching civilization after nearly half a day of chasing down retreating wood elves through their natural habitat. The sentries on the watchtowers greeted them with a cheer and a wave, but just as they were all about to be welcomed back home, a distant shudder echoed through the air, the telltale noise of a fiery explosion followed by panicked screams. Bosmery screams if Hural's ears were not failing him. His eyes quickly met those of his second-in-command, and as one, his troop discarded their salvage and trophies on the ground behind them, quickly forming up as best as they could, fatigued shoulders holding up spear and shield as the archers spread out behind and above them. Minutes passed as the explosions began to near, the panicked screams of the fleeing wood elves making it out in no uncertain terms that they would reach the homes of their heartland kinsfolk before long. The tension only grew as the silence stretched, the smaller and smaller number of the fleeing Bosmer injecting ice into the veins of the Aelids, and just as one of the younger and less hardened spear elves was about to speak out, the final fleeing elf entered their line of sight. The Bosmer looked ragged. No, that was an understatement, Haral decided. She looked downright battered as she slinked into the opening leading to his home, the unadorned robes and antlered headdress combined with the flecks of blood on both her lips and hands, marking her out as one of the maddened cannibals trying and failing to hunt down his people as nothing more than fuel for their rituals. The foolish cunt of a girl had the audacity to look relieved as she saw their battle line, shouting something that Hural decided to ignore in favor of grabbing on one of his javelins and, without preamble, tossing the weapon at her. The throwing spear struck her in the throat just as a dozen crossbow bolts slammed into her back, turning the Bosmer from elf to pincushion in one terrifying instant. The pursuers revealed themselves, but a moment later a duo of elves, clad in blackened steel plate and white fur cloaks, stepping out from the woodline even as Hural detected dozens more to be staring him, and his down with their red eyes narrowed and their terrible weapons raised. But to his great unease, it was soon revealed that the crossbowmen were but the escort detail, as a robed elf of grey skin and black hair and beard, and with eyes akin to twin burning flames, stepped out from within the forest, followed by a pair of Daedra summons on each flank. The newcomer gave the skewered Bosmer woman a sideways glance before dismissing her utterly and looking up to the group of Aelids, eyes widening as he no doubt realized the curiosity he had just stumbled upon. His expression lit up, and his excited mutter of "interesting" somehow managed to reach the fidgeting Heartland elves, even as he pulled out an odd glowing orb from his robes. Hural. The Aeliad leader's second in command hissed, "He may be summoning reinforcements. What do we do?" His eyes narrowed as he looked the scene over once again, and the analysis he could come up with was not promising. Even if we were to rush the obvious powerful mage, those crossbow elves will cut us down before we can so much as threaten him. His right hand grunted, and even if we did kill the mage, it would not be worth the cost. Yes, Hural nodded, face grim, and we would draw the attention of the rest of the Imperial army here. The older elf directed him with a sideways look. So what do we do then? We change the battlefield. Hural smirked momentarily before visibly cringing. We negotiate. The grumbling of his troops told him all he needed to know of their thoughts on that truth. Before he could be the one to offer parley to the mage, the air next to the bearded elf shuddered, and faster than his mind could follow, another figure materialized beside the mage. And to Hural's dread and astonishment, the figure of the young Mer felt infinitely more terrifying than the mage, as he felt his hairs standing on end and the very air be charged with the elf's presence, his troops looking increasingly worried as they all tightened their shield wall. Well, well, well. The young-looking elf clapped his hands before jabbing the older one with his elbow. You were certainly right, Gramps. This is interesting. Hural quickly thanked his past self for not trying to stab this creature's ancestor in broad daylight. The young elf did not bother with propriety or even proper posturing, as he simply disappeared from his previous spot and appeared right before Hural, startling his soldiers enough that one jabbed his spear forward in a panic, only to have it slapped away with a lazy wave. Rude. The poor spear wielder flinched away in terror, but the young mage had already forgotten the soldier's presence and was once more facing Hural, hand cupping his chin as if he were examining some kind of curiosity at a museum. How quaint. He finally spoke after an awkward silence. I knew some of your kind were still around, but I will admit I did not expect to actually meet you. Nor did I expect to meet a dark elf. Hural huffed, internally screaming in terror at his own stupidity. Why in oblivion did I talk back? Ha! The Dunmer barked out a laugh, still completely relaxed even while surrounded by the full force of the Aeliad remnant. True enough, not often we fire enjoyers find our way into a big old forest. He tilted his head. Then again, we did have that little jaunt into Black Marsh a few months back. Hural was starting to feel increasingly out of his depth right about now. Never you mind that. The Dunmer mage clapped his hands and peered around the Heartlander formation. I see some of the vermin that evaded us stumbled their way into your lands. He sneered. I do hope removing them was not too irritating for you. Slightly taken aback by the olive branch offered, Hural frowned. You knew of them? Why else would I have sent an archmage to chase them down? The grey elf quirked an eyebrow, and seeing how the Ayleid had no response, he shrugged. Some fools decided that it was better to die in a ditch than live in a world where Greenhill fell into the Empire's grasp. He spat on the ground. They grabbed as many of the traitors who peacefully surrendered to us as they could and dragged them away so they could cannibalize them for a ritual to keep fighting us. His red eyes took on a murderous glint. Not that they managed to get far. Between our hunting parties and the very Bosmer whose kin they kidnapped, they were driven away quite quickly. And right into our lands, Hural finished for him. And right into your lands. The Dunmer shrugged. They did not take anyone, I hope? No. The Ayleid did not even consider lying. We managed to track them down before they became a problem and even caught them as they were giving a report to some kind of military unit. The same military unit currently strewn across your gate path? The Dunmer asked lazily. Hural gave the piled corpses a sideways glance before nodding. Yes. Then it seems you have performed me a service, he hummed. An excellent excuse to re-establish relations between the Empire and your town, no. The Ayleid immediately frowned. All we wish to do is keep to ourselves. We have no need for war or territory. Ah, but that is where you are mistaken, I am afraid. The Dunmer sighed theatrically. You have already interfered in this war, and the Empire is reconquering the entirety of Tamriel, reclusive tendencies or not. Raven's point of view. I will admit that in my curiosity I have pressed the poor man a bit too hard, but it wasn't like he could do anything about it. I always did want to learn the quirks of the Ayleid from the horse's mouth, and now I finally had the chance. An excellent way to distract myself from the slog of the war, if I do say so myself. So this is your promised reward, then? The obvious aristocrat very nearly scowled at me, to drag us into a war we have nothing to gain from. If that is how you want to look at it, I smirk at him and shrug, though I will remind you that it won't be me dragging you into it, but your Bosmerite neighbors, should they learn of what happened to their patrol. He tensed. Is that a threat? Me? I press a hand atop my heart. Threaten someone? Never. The poor man looks like he just swallowed a lemon. Well, I cup my chin, so long as you aren't quite as retarded as your distant ancestors, that is. I leaned into the suddenly still elf. You aren't a slavering, flesh-weaving monster behind that honest facade. Are you, Ayleid? The stiff leader looked halfway between sputtering out denials and stabbing me with his glaive, inevitably settling on scowling at me with quite a bit of anger in his eyes as he answered without a hint of uncertainty, no. Excellent. I clapped my hands, not feeling the slightest trace of deception. You can never be sure about these things. People will keep to the stupidest of traditions simply because their ancestors followed them and call it righteous. Instead of agreeing or doing the opposite, the elf before me stiffened as realization appeared in his eyes. You can discern lies. He pointed at me, a mix of accusation and astonishment in his tone. Got it in one. I clapped my hand before ever so slightly inclining my head. I assure you, my question was not meant to insinuate anything. But as I've said, you can never be sure, yes. He grunts. Your apology is accepted. Ignoring the fact I never gave one, I mentally rolled my eyes. How generous. I nearly cackle at his minute flinch. But that is enough of that for now. Are you going to offer us your hospitality so we can discuss your integration, or should I make myself comfortable here? His shoulders sag as he realizes I wasn't going to be fucking off, as he wanted me to anytime soon. Who are you to negotiate for the Empire anyway? Oh my, where are my manners? I asked with faux terror before offering a light, barely serious bow. Raven Dagoth, Hortator of Morrowind and Prince Consort of Tamriel, at your service. Every single Ayleid stops in place. Ah. Their leader licks his suddenly dry lips. You wouldn't happen to be the same Dagoth that is the Godslayer, wouldn't you? I gave him my most charming of smiles, the one and only. Lord Hural Arantia, He answers almost mechanically, "An honor." I merely allow my smile to widen, and the poor elf crumbles instantly. "We never stood a chance, did we?" "Nope." General point of view. A loud crack rang out through the inner sanctum of the great palace of Alinor, the dread mace in the arms of a tall and armoured Altmer pulling back with a deliberate slowness, as all the other high elves present gaped in terror at what they had just witnessed. Or at least nearly all of them, as the last one was currently far too busy twitching on the ground bonelessly and begging the figure looming above them for mercy. An act that swiftly earned the poor elf a soul trap, and another application of blunt force trauma to the cranium that sent him screaming into oblivion. "There," High Justiciar Finarfin hissed at the gathered Thalmor. "Just like the two idiots before him, Gimilnon has been given the just rewards for his incompetence. How many others do I need to be rid of before we can move from this waste of my time and on to saving our homeland? Because, dear councillors," he leaned forward, causing a few of them to instinctually flinch away, "I assure you, should you keep wasting my time, I will do it all without you." The bloodbath his enemies had forced him to enact was not one anyone will easily forget, and not any time soon. The sheep that had replaced most of the original Thalmor Council after the First Great War reacted as he had learned to expect from them, cowering before them and accepting their fates like the worms that they were. Finarfin once more mentally cursed the infiltrator who slew almost every single senior veteran of the previous war that was present within the palace. Certainly some of them were heavily against his ascent, but they were also competent. Not a trait shared by their successors, they pretended to hem and haw, an act of no consequence, but to justify the protracted existence of them and their positions, even as they all inevitably reached the sole position possible. The Thalmor Council. A raspy old Mer stood up, the movement quickly followed by the others, has unanimously decided on the new leader of our people. For acts of great power and valour, we bestow upon Lord High Justiciar Finarfin the honour of the rank of Overlord. The old elf sighed, spindly shoulders slouching as if every breath was an effort. "May you be granted the wisdom to lead us to our ultimate victory." Decades of careful politicking, of careful work and manoeuvring, and of throwing himself into both study and danger. All of it for this one moment. Finarfin could only feel numb as the excuse for an elf bestowed him with his deserved accolade, the rank feeling all but empty to his ears now. Nearly snarling at the lack of fulfillment, he summoned all his will and held his rage in check. Back straightening and shoulders firming, he assured himself that victory would be the greatest balm for his disappointment. It is a good thing the council recognizes the severity of the situation. The Thalmor overlord spoke with a newfound weight. Now let us get to remedying it. Hours later, after numerous debates, shouting matches, and many lesser officials summoned to replace their overreaching superiors, the incompetent fools Finarfin was saddled with almost dared to look hopeful under his firm grip. Hope. He snorted internally as he awaited the Pyandanian delegation to drag their rears to him from Shimmerine, a poisonous and insidious little thing, but a useful one nonetheless. At the end of the day, he did not care if his troops were motivated by either dread or hope. All that mattered was victory. And victory would be his. His ancestors would demand no less. 519, Chapter 132. The Flames Alight. My negotiations with the Aliad remnant turned out rather brief after I properly introduced myself and they realized the weight of my presence. For all their self-imposed insularism, whoever founded their little town a few eras back was smart enough not to make it an absolute rule or something equally insulting, which meant they still got news from the wider world, thus making it near impossible to miss a god-slaying, and more importantly, the slayer. My mandatory and deserved patting of myself on the back aside, they quickly agreed to defect to the Empire's side after a quick round of assurances and enticements, especially since their people had suffered all manner of harassment from their Bosmer allies since time immemorial and held no love for them. Essentially, all I needed to do to no longer worry about the Aliads was touch up on their wards and have a bunch of supplies delivered to the town, just in case it fell under siege due to their cloak turning, as our enemy would no doubt paint it. Completely fair and balanced, methinks, as all things should be. There was some back and forth about the Empire's leadership being mostly Cyrodiilic, Red, the descendants of the same people the previous Aelids, treated like less than slaves, but I assured them all that so long as they did not go full retard, they would be under my personal protection. And frankly speaking, as much as hating on the ancient Aelids was only right and proper, even for elves it had been many generations since they possessed the ability to do as their ancestors did. Retaining that kind of hate after such a long period of time would ironically be a thing of only those more academically inclined, as the rest of the world had long since moved on to fresher issues to occupy their minds. I did get my hands on a small unit of Aeliad spellblades under Hurl himself, who excused his inner adventurism by using the excuse of wanting to earn his people's place properly and proving themselves to the humans of the Empire. He also proved himself to be masterful in the art of the polearm after one of my more melee-capable white cloaks joined the local warriors' training session on a dare and got himself thoroughly trashed for the effort. Hopefully I would have enough time to pester him for some pointers before we marched out again. Sure, I could crush him with ease if we were ever to actually cross our glaives, but getting better at the base technique would never hurt. Some eyebrows among the Legion were raised as we marched back into Greenhill, but just as I predicted, no grand hatred awaited our new allies, and many of the legionaries mirrored Titus's own words about the dream of Tamriel as they welcomed the newcomers. Those who were apprehensive simply accepted my word, and that was that. Sadly for me, that was all the exploration I could justify doing for a time, as the proper integration of Greenhill required my own special brand of intimidation and charisma to go smoothly and without near-future problems, something I was generous enough to ensure Tullius and his fellow soldiery did not need to suffer. Nearly a full week did we spend reinforcing our supply lines and defensive positions, and only then did we march out west towards Silvanar and ultimately Falinesti, the Bosmeri capital, the previously tired troops now eager to cut down more of the Bosmer and their Altmer masters. Oh, and word had just arrived from the east, June was ours, and Minthara was moving south. Despite the good news, my gut told me things were going to be getting interesting soon, and not in the fun way. For the mortals anyway. General point of view. The official writings of Lord Aelor of Dagoth during the Valenwood campaign, the late summer of the year 201 of the Fourth Era, saw the Western Expeditionary Force of the Empire crossing the river Xylo, the final navigable tributary of the river Strid to the north, and the greatest obstacle to our path west to Silvanar. To our utmost surprise, the Dominion army stationed within the city did not challenge the crossing of the many magically risen bridges immediately, but waited until we were halfway over the waterway to spring their trap. We would later learn that a large dam had been constructed many leagues south and destroyed on command by what was agreed to be a teleporting mage. Despite the scare of the river going from calm to raging, the Legion kept marching in good order as the Dunmerry front line formed up to fight back against the now sallying Bosmer and Altmer. I was blessed with the distinct honor of observing Lord Dagoth as he stood atop one of the bridges he himself raised and faced the great wave formed by the Thalmor Gambit. In his familiar wisdom, he made sure the enemy could see him as he faced the threat only halfway, and allowed the fools to observe the other, before he simply crushed the approaching wave into submission with a pure application of telekinesis. It was said among the legions that this marked the moment many a self-proclaimed archmage of the Altmer soiled themselves and fled the battlefield in shame. The Dominion Legion proper gave honest battle after that, but were insufficient in facing the ferocity of the Nords or the seasoned discipline of the Dunmer, their Bosmeri skirmishers falling to the far more armoured crossbowmen of the Sworn Mer, while the Alinori infantry found themselves unable to effectively pierce the spear walls of the Dunmer. Their lesser magical abilities were swiftly overwhelmed by the hundreds of Telvanni present. The Dunmeri Magi all too eager to prove themselves to their Hortator, and thus earn his favour. Those Alinori Magi with a greater gastral fortitude than their cowardly comrades who tried helping their less powerful kin, soon found themselves unable to do anything as they faced the true elite of the expeditionary force. By either automaton blade or potent magic of our own, the Altmer mages were crushed and humiliated, and all of it in plain sight of the Alinori legionaries. Their morale broke quickly, and their discipline shattered, allowing the Imperial cavalry force that had been held back in reserve to crush them as they fled in disorder. Before the day was out, a full legion of Alinor had fallen, and many of their allies besides. It was rather disappointing then that when we marched into the city of Silvanar, we found the majority of the civilian population had already fled, and were replaced with what my lord would name guerrilla skirmishers. For days we tried establishing ourselves within the city, only to have our positions attacked constantly and unrelentingly, but never enough to truly provoke a great response. Not from most people anyway. Lord Dagoth, in his wisdom, perceived what the enemy was doing, and after a few days of waiting, just enough for the supply lines to right themselves behind us, he descended upon the enemy bases personally and granted the many Bosma cells their due rewards. We were not raided again, even as we marched out of Silvanar and towards the great city of Falinisti. From the personal diary of Marco of Solitude, I think I've discovered something about myself ever since joining this campaign. I fucking hated sand. The damned thing got everywhere and heated the air up to the point even my magic couldn't stop me from sweating like a pig. How a furred people like the Khajiit can live here I will never understand. Best stop complaining before Junes sniffs it out of me again. I love that woman, but damn, does she get snappy sometimes? Anyway, we should be reaching Linmount soon, so at least there will be some shade to hide behind. Hopefully shade that isn't one of the recently reawakened dragons. Those guys were assholes. There was no damned shade. It was a god's damned tent city, for the most part. And while hiding out was possible, there was still no escape from the scorching heat. I swear to the gods, if I ever get an offer to join an army and they are marching into the desert, I might just tell Minthara to go fuck herself. Ha! The edges of the page are tainted with dried blood. Can't believe this damned thing survived. So, good news and bad news. Good news, Rimmon is surrounded by lakes and even light forest. No more fucking desert for Marco. Bad news, Rimmon is the capital of Anaquina and the Greater Elsewhere Confederacy. Which meant that taking the damn place was a slog, and we couldn't simply repeat what happened in Riverhold, since the dragons were going to be wrung out for a while longer. Thankfully the legions didn't complain about this, seemed eager even. The bloody idiots. And out of all of them, no one was more eager than the new legion of Skyrim, as they missed both the fall of Riverhold and Dune. The overeager madmen under General Ricker of all damn people rushed at the walls like rabid idiots, and worst of all, their plan worked. Well, they still needed saving, but their idiocy did give us the opening to butcher the Thalmor, so I guess it was a good plan since it worked. Never mind that, the city fell after a few days of constant fighting, a right miracle if that smug cunt Tiberius was to be believed. Am I spoiled by being used to them falling within a day? If yes, then good, fuck normal sieges. We even managed to catch the Mene as he was escaping. The big cat looked like he wanted to do nothing more than get out of this whole situation, as he was apparently just a convenient figurehead to both the Dominion and his own people. Sadly for him, he was the only Mene in existence, so he was inevitably forced to rule instead of knitting or whatever he actually wanted to do. And the only way a new Mene would ever be born was for the previous one to die, so it wasn't like he could ever abdicate. Almost pitied the dumbass. Hopefully capturing him will be enough to pacify the entirety of Elsewhere. I really do not want to spend more weeks marching. Well, I suppose it was almost enough to pacify Elsewhere. The northern kingdom of Anaquina surrendered easily enough, but Alinor was too close to Palatine for it to fall that easily, especially since my fellow Ultma pumped reinforcements into the damned place as quickly as they could now that they were no longer reeling from our invasion. And now I am thinking about the amount of Ultma I killed just in the past day. I hate war. Going to go find Junes now. We are marching out to besiege Corinth in 2 days, and I am not going to spend that time moping. General POV, proper. Captain Gravus of the Leowin Guard stood atop the refurbished walls of his beloved city, frowning deeply as he waited for the garrison fleet to return, having sallied out to chase down a squadron of Dominion raiders in the morning. Bloody fools, he spat on the stone below him. Those things are too quick to catch easily. Not like we can just let them reave, though. He scoffed at his own words, would make the populace unruly. He saw movement at the horizon then, and nearly sighed in relief before squinting at the odd shape of the approaching ships. Those were a lot of approaching ships, and in all his years he had never once seen the banner of a blue serpent they all flew. That was more than enough for the old captain, as he immediately shouted, "Alarm!" His voice echoed by the other guards quickly enough. But they were not facing another Altmer raid, not this time. As the approaching ships practically skipped across the water, ignoring the vast majority of its resistance as they rushed for both the bridge and the docks of the great city. Long before the guards, auxiliaries and mercenaries protecting the city could form up, figures clad in blue scale mail and wielding either axe or cutlass leapt from the ships and began laying ruin to all they could reach, setting fire to the more flammable buildings and spreading true chaos throughout Leowin. By the time the first Imperial response caught the first group of the blue-clad invaders, the construction site of the just barely unfinished bridge fort fell under attack, the few fortifications falling quickly to the surprise attack, and soon the bridge of Leowin itself was breached, parts of the invading fleet immediately surging onto the lower Niben River, even as the city burned behind them. Emperor Titus Mede II kept his face utterly flat as he listened to the messenger relate his report, the young new Count of Leowin having just sent an urgent message through the orb he was given prior to the war. The Temple District still stands, as well as the Noble District. The young man takes a sharp breath and goes on. The Count is unsure of the other side of the city, but judging by the smoke and noise, our forces are still holding. Too many troops on our side to get killed that quickly. Marshal Valenicus delivered his own opinion. Besides, surprise attack or not, even our auxiliary troops are trained to not break at the first setback. I see, Titus frowned. And the bridge? Breached? The messenger winced. A few ships have already sailed through. Their suspected destination is Breville. For a moment, no one spoke, and the air around the Emperor grew heavy. The Chancellor was just about to interject, but a raised hand halted him in his tracks as he quickly noticed his liege's other hand gripping the hilt of his sword to the point his knuckles turned white. "Maro," Titus spoke gravely. "Your Majesty." The commander saluted. "Fetch me my armor, .. Far away to the north, where the war yet to truly ignite, and where the grasping claws of Wayrest were finally being challenged by the drunken lashes of Daggerfall, the so far untouched region of Rivenspire was host to yet another conflict. A stocky, well-armored orc, armed with shield and axe, grunted in exertion as he blocked the backward swing of his opponent's spear, the great weapon threatening to sap his strength once more if it so much as touched him. He roared out in fury, shield slamming the hand of the young orc facing him and forcing him to drop the heavy weapon, only to regret it but a moment later. The far larger young'un twisted to the side, and within the blink of an eye, the elder one's shield was shorn to pieces by a pair of scimitars, the force behind the blows sending him stumbling back and allowing his axe to be cut in twain as he flailed it upwards. A thunderous kick, and he was on the ground. The large orc stood above his defeated foe, and for a moment all the cheers and jeers in the open arena died down, the observers eager to see how the defeated would die. But the young orc did something none of them could have ever expected. He removed his helmet, sheathed one of his swords, and offered his hand. "Killing someone of your skill simply because I can would be a waste." He grinned toothily, the expression both friendly and threatening at once. "We cannot build a home for our people if we keep butchering each other." The fallen warrior glared at his foe, enraged that his way to Malakath had been denied. But the young one's expression, the assurance in his eyes, and the pure, earnest honor he carried himself with stopped him from lashing out. Maybe, a small traitorous part of him thought, maybe he is right. It was not the first time he had listened to the young fool. He laughed and jeered with the others when he first arrived after all. But as the victories stacked up and more warriors were spared the spear's dignity, the jeers were forgotten, now replaced with a grudging respect for the idealist's conviction. Before he realized it, he had grasped the offered hand and was dragged up with great ease, nearly stumbling over himself as he regained his bearings, and quickly realizing that the entire gathering of Orsimer surrounding him was now staring straight at him. Ah, but one did not reach the ripe old age of 40 like he did without gaining some wits to themselves, and the defeated Orcish chieftain grabbed the young Un's arm and rose it into the air before roaring, "Warlord Durak!" Before the rest of the orcs could realize what they had done, they too were echoing his words, and a new Orsinium was born. 520, Chapter 133, A Brand of Gold. General POV, the imperial city's waterfront district's usual loud bustle, disappeared as if under a wave as the many dockworkers and tradesmen rushed to clear the main street leading to the docks, retreating just in time to avoid the rushed advance of a large company of mounted soldiers. Emperor Titus Mede II rode at the head of the group, surrounded by a few of his advisors and listening to their reports, even as his eyes were fixated on the south. A town crier's booming voice echoed from a nearby street, the doctored news of Leowin's troubles spreading through the crowd like a wildfire, ensuring that the merchants whose ships had been requisitioned remained pressured to relinquish their vessels. The emperor frowned as his marshal finished listing the troops available to him and nodded, turning then to his Redguard admiral, "Alakim, how soon can we set out?" "We've had to rush some preparations, but the river ships are ready." The usual smile on the cheerful man's face was gone. "We removed what cargo we could, but even when overpaying the crews, just couldn't work quickly enough." "Damn shame Dagoth's toys are all in elsewhere." The marshal scoffed, outwardly still disdaining the Hortator. "What we have should do in any case. The garrison is already weak as is." "Indeed," Titus voiced neutrally and spurred his horse. "Keep the peace, my friends, and should I fall—" Both of the men frowned but still offered grave nods. Titus's horse trotted onwards, catching him up with a lone figure clad head to toe in silvered armor covered in a white tabard decorated with lines of gold and dominated by the embroidery of the Chimel Adabal. "Grandmaster," the emperor greeted, "are your brothers ready?" "We have been ready since the last war." The man's face was hidden by his great helm, reining in his radiating determination from blinding to merely present. "Let us ride and show the wicked the fate of their ilk." "Indeed," Titus agreed and donned his helmet, the world once more feeling lighter as he slid into the one state he could truly understand. "Let's." Sheathed at his belt, Goldbrand began vibrating in anticipation. The imperial city of Bravil was a place on the upturn. Ever since the Oblivion Crisis, its rulers were motivated to ensure the destruction their subjects suffered under the callous hand of Dagon would never repeat itself, and that their home would never again be known as the stinking armpit of Cyrodiil. Such a trend continued for near 2 centuries, to differing amounts of success, and all the way to the current countess of the city, a known loyalist and supporter of the Mede regime, and a woman beloved by her subjects for her many works and focus on trade that increased the city's prosperity manifold. All of it felt like it had been for naught for one Clarissa Terentius, as the Countess was dragged away from the city's public theatre by her heavily armed bodyguards, her loyal warriors blocking the stray arrows peppering the fleeing crowd around them with both shield and their bodies when needed without an ounce of hesitation. It felt as if the city was collapsing around them as their outlander attackers made use of every possible line of approach to swarm their positions and prevent a proper battle line from being formed, spreading chaos and confusion as they went. Clarissa wished dearly to rush to her people's aid, but she was also well aware that she was an administrator and not a combatant, her combat capabilities beginning and ending at pointing at a target and hoping her bodyguards were capable of ending them. A fact she thoroughly regretted as she was dragged into a side passage that would lead to her personal keep only for her guard detail to be halted by a group of scale-mail-clad elves. Their leader was a tall one, wielding a pair of broad single-bladed swords and clad in more heavy armor that looked to be made of malachite, unlike his subordinate's steel scales. The elf barked something in a language that only distantly sounded like Tamrielic, and seeing Clarissa's failure to respond, he let out a dark chuckle and pointed a blade at her guards, the challenge in posture clear to all. Naturally, the leader of her bodyguards, a knight of Archay, took one good look at what was obviously the enemy elite and ordered, "Men, we are pulling back. Protect the Countess at all costs." The elf evidently did not like that and immediately rushed the man, throwing axes announcing his arrival as his fellow raiders followed his lead with practiced precision. Clarissa thanked the nine for their blessings as none of her guards fell to the thrown weapons before the melee could be joined, but her thanks disappeared just as quickly as she saw her protectors immediately be put on the back foot by the over-aggressive enemy. All of them save for the knight, as his heavy plate armor and greatsword, combined with decades of experience, allowed him to both fight the enemy leader off and aid his comrades from time to time, stopping the elves from simply overwhelming them outright. It would not last. One by one, Clarissa's protectors fell to enemy blades, and even as they valiantly took a foe down in turn, it was far too few to matter in the end. Her only hope remained to flee to her home and await outside aid. A future that was dashed utterly as she stumbled into the open street they had first arrived from, only to be met with an entire ship crew's worth of scale mail-clad elves punching through a unit of city guard and moving in her direction. To her side, the leader of the elves lost one of his hands as he parried the knight's greatsword, screaming his throat out as the blade was stuck in his bone, and blindly thrusting out upwards with his sword and piercing the chainmail under the man's helm, killing him on the spot. The elf kicked the knight off his sword and accepted a potion from one of his comrades, contenting himself with placidly watching as the rest of Clarissa's guard detail was cut down even as they desperately kept retreating. They were halfway down the street when the other group of elves reached them, leaving them completely surrounded. Clarissa knew her days were numbered as the elven leader barked out a harsh order and unsheathed the dagger she always carried with herself, very nearly dropping it due to lack of practice. Might as well meet Talos properly, right? As if a silent command had been given, both the units of blue-clad elves rushed the remaining quintet of humans, blades drawn and eyes filled with murder. A thundering war horn was all the warning they got before the entirety of their rear flank disappeared under a charge of heavy cavalry, the gleaming white tabards of the knights and their horses overtaking the blue of the Maormer as swiftly as the eye could follow, the blood flying in all directions, failing to stain their gleaming armaments for even a moment. But for all the blinding glory of the Knights of the Nine, the figure leading the charge was far more attention-grabbing. Clad head to toe in ebony embossed with gold and decorated in crimson silks, the armor looked like a crossing between an ancient muscle cuirass and the more modern full plate mail. The rider's face was hidden behind a blank-faced full legionary helm, the tip of which ended in a glorious golden crown instead of the usual plume. But even that was surpassed by his weapon, as what could only be the Emperor of Tamriel swung his blazing sword through the throngs of Maormer, the golden blade cutting through their armor as if through parchment, and only growing more powerful with each kill as it summoned a conflagration of golden flame around itself. The Maormer leader, realizing things were rapidly turning against him, rushed Clarissa in an attempt to gain leverage, but before he could get even halfway through his sprint, he was incinerated by the golden firestorm, his subordinates following a moment later. Not even 5 seconds passed between Clarissa being surrounded and rescued, causing the poor woman to stumble and fall on her ass as the knights passed her remaining guardians by, without bothering to acknowledge them, leaving behind only the Emperor and a pair of riders clad in heavy Penitus Oculatus garb. "Clarissa," Titus nodded as he raised his visor, "you are unharmed." His voice carried a greater certainty than she had ever heard from him. Without a word, her guards raised her from her shameful position, and she bowed. "I thank you for the rescue, Your Majesty," but she kept her rising bile down and focused on what she needed to know. How did the Dominion breach Leowin? And who were those elves? Titus frowned at seeing his friend so distraught but still answered, "Maormer, I fear. The Dominion has somehow managed to ally themselves with Pyandanea." "Pyandanea?" Clarissa frowned, "but that is—" "Ridiculous," Titus finished for her, scoffing as he did. "King Orgnum's hatred for the Ultima is known to anyone aware of the islands he rules." He turned away from her and muttered, "It is a good thing we pressed our advantage when we did." She wanted to go deeper into it, but a fiery explosion in the distance drew her back into the present. "What of Leowin?" She pressed, "How did they manage to breach the fort so quickly?" "Because they were just as surprised as you were," Titus answered and turned to her with narrowed eyes. something that should not have happened, as you were provided with an orb through which I sent the warning hours ago." She was halfway through sheathing her dagger as he finished speaking, making her nearly stab herself as she jerked her head upwards. "What? That little thing? I thought that was only for troop movements and gave it to my guard captain." "Clarissa," Titus palmed his face, "is your guard captain a mage?" She fidgeted. "No?" The Emperor very nearly groaned in despair, but managed to hold himself back. "No matter, Bravil would not have been able to weather the assault, even with the warning, what with you sending every single soldier possible to garrison our conquests." The Countess wished to be proud of her contributions, but at that moment all she could feel was regret at not stopping her city from getting halfway sacked back into a ruin. How was she supposed to expect a near-mythical people from allying with their enemies and punching straight through their territory anyway? "I see the frustrations of the day are finally catching up to you." Titus gave her a look of understanding. "An understatement." Clarissa deadpanned. "Merely cleaning up the mess will take weeks." "Bravil always was challenging." Titus smirked as cheers of victory began spreading through the city, numerous legionaries of the Empire marching across the streets and cornering the few Maormer who had not yet fled to the docks, where the Knights of the Nine now awaited, standing proudly between the raiders and their now emptied ships. "No point in sugarcoating it, Titus," Clarissa scoffed. "We were always called a shithole by the other cities." "Quite." Titus' placid facade nearly cracked as he spoke. Emperor Uriel wouldn't have mistaken it for Black Marsh otherwise. Clarissa sighed. "We are never living that down, are we?" King Norivalian of Pyandonea tapped his foot irritably as he observed yet another assault on the temple district of Leowin be repelled by the stubborn defenders, the priest that had become the linchpin of imperial defense, once more blocking his Ultima allies' attempts at simply burning their way through. "How many did we lose this time?" the Mormor demanded from his second. 130. The thin elf answered blandly. "It would appear that the enemy is well supplied behind their walls. Their bolts and arrows are not running out." Norivalian grunted. "And our attempts to smoke them out?" "Difficult considering the other pockets of resistance," was the answer he was given. "If we tried ferrying over enough wood, the keep and gate forts would no doubt sally out and harry our attempts. Our best option is still to wait for the reinforcements Alinor promised us." "We have been waiting for 3 days now." Norivalian pointed out with a scowl on his face. "The Reavers are content with the loot we captured for now, but the lack of progress is going to make some of them curious." "Then simply cut them down, my liege." His second bowed his head. "The treasures of Orgnum put you head and shoulders above the fools. Any attempt is fated to sputter out and die." Norivalian rubbed his chin in thought for a moment before slowly nodding. "What you say is sensible. If another day passes, ensure it is Garvalian who challenges me. The upstart has always been hesitant to follow my directives." "By your command, my liege." The pale Mormor bowed fully. A distant war horn cut through the relative silence that followed, and minutes later Norivalian found himself jogging up the wall stairs of the city he had so thoroughly sacked. His enthusiasm was not meant to last, however, as the moment he stepped reached his destination, absently answering his subjects' salutes as he went, and he was faced with hundreds of banners swaying in the distance. Dominating the entire field west of Leowin was the Golden Dragon of Tamriel, carried on fields of red, the color feeling like a promise to the elven sovereign as he quickly realized the situation had been thoroughly turned against him. He could almost taste the elation of the humans who shared his vista. The Western Gate garrison already bursting with cheers and promises of vicious murder for his kin. Luckily for Norivalian, the Maormer were not blinded by such idiocy as a sense of honor and fair play, and the moment he began calling out orders for a methodical retreat, his subjects followed without much complaint. Unluckily for Norivalian, however, the residents of Leowin were far less than willing to accommodate his escape, as every single legionary within the Western Gate fort that resisted him even now rushed to defend the gatehouse, and the other pockets of resistance struck out as one, overrunning numerous crews of reavers with either numbers, surprise, skill, or all three at once. Every step was hounded by the stout members of the city garrison if they were lucky, or the frenzied and bloodthirsty citizens if they were not, the city's populace all too willing to die in droves if it meant choking the life out of their blue-skinned invaders with their bare hands if need be. And then, to make things even worse, a certain emperor was currently cutting through his most elite forces with all the hesitance of a lawnmower, his sword allowing him to simply ignore most of their defenses as he relied on his ridiculously enchanted armor to protect him. Even so far away, a certain mage remained a thorn in the Dominion's side. A full sixth of the sea elven force fell to human blades by the time Noravalian reached his vessel, the few Alinori mages he was given boarding the ships with furious scowls on their faces as they were forced to watch a rider clad in black cut down a pair of their own with a mighty golden blade, their magic utterly useless against the armor's enchantments and their wards falling in short order to the barrage of the Imperial battle mage who followed his emperor into battle. Titus stopped his steed just at the edge of the pier and glared at the retreating fleet of ships, his sword glowing menacingly as he pointed at them for a moment before hesitating and sheathing the weapon. Best save the power for when it would make a difference. Besides, he smirked under his helm and patted his saddlebag. My part in this is over. That was a mess. The Ultima Mage snapped at the Pyandanian king. What use was the surprise attack if we are merely to flee at the first showing of true opposition? We did our part, Ultima. Noravalian very nearly decapitated the idiot for his audacity. Leowyn was under our dominion for a full 3 days, and yet the reinforcements meant to arrive just after us never showed. There must have been something that held them up. The High Elf stammered, or are you calling the Dominion traitors? The second High Elf mage punched her comrade in the face before Noravalian could, "Do shut your mouth, Veldran." She flapped her hand about to soothe the pain. Your failure to dig through the enemy defenses has shamed you enough already. The Maorma ruler would never admit it, but he felt immense petty satisfaction in his heart as he saw the grounded elf flinch away in shame. Apologies for my friends. She nearly spat the world out. Conduct, your Royal Highness. Archmage Indris tilted her head in a manner that could have been misconstrued as a bow if one squinted. We cannot be sure what happened with the reinforcements, but I can assure you that the Dominion and our new overlord is not quite so foolish as to simply throw allies away and snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Noravalian couldn't help the light snort from leaving him. It is no matter. My people will grow fat from the spoils of our victory, and make no mistake, for it was one. He ignored the woman's raised eyebrow and went on. We would have never been able to hold the city for long, even with a full legion. Indris considered him briefly before nodding. True enough, your Royal Highness. However, I must remind you that the point of this excursion was to draw forces from the other fronts, and that has failed rather spectacularly, I am afraid. An unfortunate outcome, the sea elf admitted blandly. We will simply keep striking where they do not expect then. The effects should show after another few cities are burned by my army. Whatever else they were about to say died in their throats as they felt a weight settle upon the world around them. Noravalian felt his connection to the serpent swimming under his ship explode with what could only be described as existential dread, and was forced to look up. Oh, he muttered as he saw the skies darkening, that isn't good.